The dog found her first. A German shepherd, frozen mid-stride, hackles up, staring at something that didn't want to be found. Lucas Mercer almost walked past it. Almost. Inside that truck, tied, beaten, barely breathing, was a sheriff's deputy who knew too much. And outside, somewhere between the pines and the darkening sky, the man who put her there was already circling back. This isn't a story about a hero. It's about a man who buried his past so deep in the wilderness he thought nothing could dig it back up. He was wrong. If this kind of story grips you, the kind that doesn't let go, hit that subscribe button right now and follow this channel to the end. Drop a like and tell me in the comments, what city or country are you watching from? I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now, let's go. The trail didn't have a name anymore. It used to. Sycamore Cut, according to the faded wooden marker that had been swallowed by blackberry brambles sometime in the last decade. Now it was just a suggestion of a path, a thin scar through the undergrowth where deer moved at dawn, and nobody else bothered. Lucas Mercer had been running it for almost 2 years without seeing another human being. That was the whole point. He ran it every morning at 05:30, not because his body demanded it, but because his mind did. Movement kept the lid on things. Stillness let them breathe. He was 4 miles in when Ranger stopped. No warning, no gradual deceleration. 1 second the dog was 3 feet ahead, tongue out, easy loping stride, and then he just stopped, like something had cut the power. Every muscle in the shepherd's body went rigid. Ears rotated forward independently, the way satellite dishes move when they're hunting a signal. His tail dropped below the horizontal, which was never a good sign. Lucas pulled up immediately. Old habit. When Ranger flagged, you stopped moving and started listening. He stood there in the cold, controlling his breathing, letting the forest speak. Wind, pines creaking, a distant woodpecker working a dead tree. Nothing. But Ranger didn't move. Lucas unzipped the collar of his jacket and scanned the tree line to his left. A shallow ravine ran parallel to the trail about 40 feet out, choked with broken deadfall and low-growth elderberry. Something about the geometry of the undergrowth was wrong, too uniform, too arranged. He left the trail. The ground was soft from 2 days of rain, and he moved through it without sound. An old, unconscious discipline, weight forward, heel never touching first. Ranger followed at his left hip without being told. The dog's breathing had gone shallow and controlled, the way it got when something real was happening. 15 feet into the brush, Lucas saw it. A pickup truck. Dark blue. Maybe a 2009 or 2010 F-150. He couldn't tell through the camouflage of broken pine branches stacked deliberately across the hood and roof. Someone had driven it into the ravine, or rolled it, and then spent real time making it invisible from the trail. This wasn't somebody who'd gotten lost and abandoned their vehicle. The effort was intentional. The hiding was intentional. Lucas stood still for 5 full seconds before approaching. He came around the passenger side first because it gave him the better angle on the driver, and he moved low, staying below the window line until he was close enough to look in. The window was up. Through the dirty glass, he could make out the cab interior, fast food wrappers on the floor, a police radio receiver mounted below the dash, a cracked GPS unit, and a blue-gray uniform jacket balled up on the passenger seat. Law enforcement. And then he saw the hands, bound at the wrists with zip ties, resting against the base of the center console like they'd just given up. Female hands, slim fingers with broken nails, dried blood at the knuckles. Lucas was at the door in 3 seconds. He yanked the handle, locked. He pulled the folding knife from his jacket pocket, slid the pommel hard into the lower corner of the passenger window, and hit it once, sharp and controlled. The glass didn't shatter. It crazed, a web of fractures spreading out from the impact point. He hit it again, and it fell inward in a cascade of pebble-sized chunks. He cleared the glass from the frame with his sleeve and reached in to unlock the door. She was in the back seat. He hadn't seen her from outside because she was folded against the driver's side door, knees pulled up, head down. The same gray-blue uniform, a department badge on the chest, her dark hair plastered against the side of her face with dried blood from a cut above her right ear. Zip ties at the wrists and ankles. A strip of silver tape over her mouth that had partially peeled at one corner. Lucas opened the back door and crouched at the threshold. "Hey." He kept his voice flat and low. "I'm not going to hurt you. I need you to look at me." Nothing. He pressed 2 fingers against the side of her neck. Pulse there. Fast. A little thready, but there. Alive. Can you hear me? Her eyes opened, dark brown, unfocused at first, rolling slightly, and then landing on his face with something that took a moment to become recognition. Not recognition of him. She'd never seen him. But recognition that he was human, that this wasn't what she'd been expecting to wake up to. She flinched back. Easy. He showed her both hands, palms out. My name is Lucas. I found your truck. I'm going to take the tape off your mouth. Nod if you understand. A pause. Then a slow, exhausted nod. He peeled the tape carefully, starting from the loose corner. She gasped when it came free and sucked in 3 or 4 ragged breaths, working her jaw like someone testing whether it still functioned. Thank you, she said. Her voice was wrecked, dry and abraded, like she'd been screaming at some point and had nothing left. What's your name? Collins. A beat. Deputy Emma Collins, Holt County Sheriff's Department. Lucas glanced at the badge on her jacket. The name and department matched the patch on the shoulder. He pulled his knife again, and she stiffened. Zip ties, he said. She went still and let him work. The plastic was thick, commercial grade, not the cheap hardware store variety. And it took 3 cuts to get through. When her wrists came free, she winced and immediately brought them to her chest, pressing them together like she was trying to stop bleeding that wasn't there anymore. He cut her ankles next. Can you move your feet? She tried. Grimaced. Yeah, I think so. How long have you been in here? I don't... She stopped, swallowed. I don't know what time it is. Lucas checked his watch. 4:15. Afternoon. She closed her eyes briefly. Since last night. Sometime after midnight. 16 hours. Maybe more. Did you lose consciousness at any point? A few times, I think. She touched the wound on her head, fingers moving with the automatic assessment of someone who'd been trained to evaluate injury. It's not as bad as it feels. Head wounds bleed. You might have a concussion. I definitely have a concussion. She almost laughed. It came out wrong, thin and brittle at the edges. I need to call this in. My radio was in the front seat. She started to move and he put a hand on her arm, not gripping, just stopping. Before you do that. He held her eyes. You said my radio was in the front seat. You said it like you expected it to be gone. She looked at him for a long moment. The forest was quiet except for Ranger, who was sitting at the edge of the tree line with his eyes fixed on the trail above. They took it, she said. Who did? She didn't answer right away. She was watching the dog. Is that yours? Yes. What's his name? Ranger. Something shifted in her expression, not softening exactly, more like a decision being made. Deputy Collins. Emma. She pushed herself upright, slow and careful, and Lucas moved back to give her room. She sat on the edge of the seat with her feet on the ground and her elbows on her knees, breathing through whatever pain she was managing. His name is Emma. My name is Emma. And the people who put me in here... She stopped, looked up. They have a radio too. Lucas went very quiet inside. Meaning they know your frequencies. Meaning they are my frequencies. She met his eyes. Someone in my department did this to me. The sky was doing that thing it did in late October, going from gold to bruised gray in about 20 minutes, the light dying faster than it seemed like it should. Lucas had maybe 40 minutes of good visibility left, and the cabin was 1.5 miles away over uneven terrain. He made the decision quickly, the way he'd learned to make decisions in places where the cost of hesitation was measured in seconds and casualties. Can you walk? Yes. You sure? Because I need you to be honest with me, not tough. Emma Collins looked up at him with an expression that managed to be both exhausted and irritated simultaneously. I said I can walk. All right. He helped her out of this truck and she stood, tested her weight, and only grabbed his arm for about 2 seconds before she let go. Her legs were unsteady from the circulation loss, but she found her footing. Lucas could see her jaw tighten with the effort of not showing how much it hurt. He didn't comment on it. There's a cabin about 1.5 miles north. I have first aid there, food, and a phone. He didn't mention the phone was a satellite unit and that he'd owned it for 2 years and used it approximately 3 times. I want to clear the area first. Move quiet, Stay behind me. Don't talk unless I talk to you. Ranger will take left flank. Emma blinked. Ranger will take left flank. He knows what it means. She looked at the dog. Ranger, without any visible cue, had moved into position off Lucas's left shoulder. Okay, she said. They moved. The 1.5 miles took 30 minutes because Lucas took it slow and he took it careful. He stopped twice, once when Ranger's ears came up at something in the undergrowth to the east that turned out to be a deer, and once when he spotted fresh tire tracks on the fire road that bisected the trail at the quarter-mile mark. The tracks were wide. A truck or an SUV, probably within the last few hours. He looked at them for a moment without saying anything. They came in from the east gate, which means they know this area. He filed it away and kept moving. Emma kept up. He'd been prepared to adjust his pace considerably, but she matched him without complaint, and while her breathing was labored in the first quarter-mile from the physical stress of 16 hours in a confined space, it evened out by the halfway point. Whoever she was before all this, she was in shape. She didn't talk, which he respected. Ranger maintained his position the whole way in, head swiveling, nose working. The dog was the most reliable early warning system Lucas had ever encountered, better than any sensor technology he'd worked with, because it processed a full spectrum of information simultaneously and never got tired and never stopped paying attention. He'd trusted Ranger with his life in circumstances more dramatic than this, and the animal had never let him down. The cabin appeared through the trees at 4:58 p.m., 15 minutes before full dark. Lucas had built the place himself, or rather he'd rebuilt it. The structure existed when he bought the property, a trapper's cabin from the 1940s with a stone chimney and a collapsed roof, and he'd spent 8 months making it livable. It wasn't beautiful. The exterior walls were rough-cut pine boards weathered to the color of driftwood. The roof was corrugated steel, and the front porch sagged slightly on the north side where a support post had settled into soft ground. Inside was a single main room with a fieldstone fireplace, a kitchen area along the back wall, a loft above with a bed, and a smaller room off the east wall that he used for storage and that contained a gun safe, a first aid kit the size of a small suitcase, and shelves of canned goods that would last him through a hard winter without a supply run. He'd chosen it because it was the most remote habitable structure in a 40-square-mile area. He was starting to think that hadn't been remote enough. Emma sat at the table near the fireplace while Lucas got the fire going. Ranger settled by the door and didn't move. The dog had been wound tight since the trail, and Lucas could feel it, that particular frequency of alertness that meant something wasn't resolved yet. "You need to let me look at that cut," Lucas said. "I've had worse." "I know. I'm still going to look at it." He brought the first aid kit to the table and opened it. Emma sat with her hands flat on the tabletop, tolerating his examination with the stillness of someone who'd been through field triage before. The cut above her ear was about an inch long, had stopped bleeding on its own, and didn't need stitches but would need to be cleaned. He irrigated it with saline, applied antiseptic, and closed it with 2 butterfly strips. While he worked, she talked. He'd half expected her not to. She had the careful quality of someone who measured what they said before they said it. But maybe the concussion lowered the threshold, or maybe she'd been holding it for 16 hours and it needed somewhere to go. "I've been working a case for 11 months, she said. Wildlife trafficking. Started with poaching reports in the northern sector of the park, unusual ones, not trophy hunters. Someone was taking specific animals. Red-tailed hawks, black bears, certain snake species, patterns that didn't match recreational poaching. What matched? Wholesale extraction." She winced as he cleaned near the wound's edge. "I started pulling supply chain data, looking at where those animals went. It took months because the operation was layered. Legitimate wildlife rescue organizations on the surface, all properly licensed, all with clean records. But underneath it," she paused. "They were processing the animals for biochemical compounds, specific glandular secretions, venoms, certain organic compounds, synthesizing them into stimulants." Lucas set down the saline bottle. "What kind of stimulants?" "The kind that don't exist in a pharmacology textbook yet. Novel psychostimulants with an extremely high addiction profile. The preliminary toxicology reports—" She stopped. "You don't want the chemistry lecture." "I don't need it. Keep going." "Every time I got close enough to make arrests, something happened. A tip would go wrong, a witness would recant, an operation would fold before we got there." She looked at the table surface. "The last one, 3 weeks ago, we had a raid planned on a processing facility in the western sector. 4 deputies, a federal liaison, full surveillance authorization. We were wheels up at Wo 300. By the time we arrived, the facility was empty. Not abandoned, empty. Cleaned empty. Bleached floors. Equipment gone. Like they'd had 12 hours of warning, and you started looking for the leak, and someone started looking at me. A flat statement. No drama in it. Last night, I got a call from my supervisor asking me to meet him at the north lot of the Park Service building. Routine follow-up, he said. When I got there, she touched the side of her head reflexively. I don't remember much after that. I woke up in the truck. Lucas sat back. Who else knew about the meeting? Just him. The fireplace popped. Ranger's ears moved, but his body didn't. Your supervisor, Lucas said carefully. Is that Captain Graves? Emma looked at him sharply. How do you know that name? There's a framed department photo in the vestibule of the Holt County substation. I drove past there 6 months ago on a supply run. Lots of names under lots of faces. He paused. I pay attention. She held his gaze for a moment, reading something in it, and apparently decided it was true. Victor Graves, she said. 22 years on the force. 4 commendations. He trained me. The fire crackled. He's the one, Emma said. Quiet and precise, like reading a sentence from a page she'd memorized against her will. I'm almost certain. I just don't have the documentation yet. Lucas looked at the fire for a moment. The people who left you in that truck, do they know I found you? They knew someone was coming. Before they put the tape on me, one of them said... She stopped. Something moved behind her eyes. He said the ex-soldier better stay in his hole. So they know you exist. They know where your cabin is, roughly. Roughly. I'm sorry, she said. And she meant it. He could hear that she meant it, which was unusual enough to notice. I didn't choose to land in your trail. No, Lucas said, but you did. And that means it's already too late for both of us to pretend otherwise. He stood and went to the kitchen, filled a glass of water, and brought it back. Emma drank half of it without pausing. You should eat something, he said. I know. She set the glass down. In a minute. She looked at him directly for what felt like the first time. Not assessing for threat, not calculating, just looking. Who are you exactly? You move like... She searched for the word. You move like someone who was paid to move like that. I was, Lucas said simply. Not anymore. Military? Navy. Special operations? He didn't answer, which was its own answer. She nodded slowly. Something settled in her posture. Not relief exactly, more like a recalibration. Can I use your phone? She asked. You can. He moved to the shelf above the fireplace and lifted the satellite handset from its cradle. But I want you to think about who you're calling before you call them. You told me someone in your department is protecting a trafficking syndicate. You told me your operations have been leaking for months. And you told me the man who might be responsible called you to a meeting alone the night before last. He held the phone out without handing it to her yet. So tell me who you're calling that you're absolutely certain is clean. Emma's hand was extended but didn't close on the phone. The fire, the dog by the door, the darkening squares of the windows. She pulled her hand back. I don't know, she said. I don't know who's clean. Lucas set the phone on the table between them. Then we wait until you do.
What?
The night came in hard and cold. Lucas made soup from the pantry. A simple thing, canned tomatoes and broth and pasta, nothing that required skill. And Emma ate it across the table from him with the focus of someone who was eating to function, not because food tasted like anything right now. Ranger stayed at the door. The fire burned lower. They talked in pieces. Not a debrief, not a strategy session, just 2 people in a difficult situation finding the edges of what they knew and what they didn't. Emma knew the wildlife trafficking operation's surface geography, but not its command structure. Lucas knew the terrain for 30 miles in every direction, but not the players in law enforcement. The overlap between their knowledge was small. The gap was enormous. What he knew, someone had deliberately hidden her truck. That took planning and time and familiarity with the forest. It meant multiple people, people who'd been through this area before. What he suspected, they'd intended to come back. The truck wasn't a dump site. It was a temporary storage site, which meant they'd planned to move her again, or to make her disappear more permanently, and something had interrupted that plan. He didn't share that part with Emma because she'd probably already figured it out herself and didn't need it said out loud. Around 10 o'clock, she fell asleep in the chair with her head tilted against the high wooden back, which told him more about how bad the concussion was than anything she'd said. He watched her breathing for a moment to make sure it was even and deep, then moved her to the couch carefully, draped a wool blanket across her, and went to the window. The trees were black shapes against a sky that had cleared to show stars. Cold out there, below freezing by now. Ranger came and stood beside him. The dog was still wound tight. "Yeah," Lucas said quietly. "Me too." He spent the next 2 hours going through his gear inventory and making a mental survey of the cabin's defensive geometry. 2 windows on the south face, one east, one west. One front door, one back door, that he'd added himself and which opened outward instead of inward, because outward opening doors are mechanically harder to force. No basement. The loft had a skylight he never used that he now regarded with fresh suspicion. Sight lines from the tree line. The south windows were exposed to roughly 120 degrees of approach. The north wall was backed against a rock outcropping that functioned as a natural blind, which was good. The east approach was channeled through dense second-growth pine that slowed movement considerably. He could work with this. He checked the rifle in the gun safe, a Remington 700 in .308, bolt action, with a good scope, cleaned it out of habit, even though it was already clean, loaded a 10-round magazine, and placed it on the shelf near the fireplace. He added his Glock 19 to the right side of his waistband. Both had been legal purchases with full paperwork. He hadn't touched either of them in 4 months. It felt entirely too familiar. He was by the front window, sitting in the dark on a wooden stool and watching the tree line when he heard Emma move behind him. "You don't sleep," she said. "Not much." She came to stand beside him. She'd found her footing better. The few hours of sleep had helped. She was still pale and the cut on her head had started to bruise around the butterfly strips, a dark crescent spreading toward her cheekbone. She looked at the rifle on the shelf. "You were expecting this," she said. "Not an accusation, just an observation." "I was expecting something." He glanced at her. "Get some more sleep. You need it more than I do." "I've been trying to figure out," she said, ignoring him, "why they chose that ravine. It's off the main trail, it's concealed, but it's also over a mile from the nearest fire road. That's a hard carry if you're moving someone unconscious. There's a secondary access track about 200 meters east of where we found you. It's not on any current Park Service map, but the terrain shows it's been used regularly. Ruts are too consistent for deer paths." She turned to look at him fully. "You noticed that in the dark?" "I noticed the tire tracks crossing the main trail at the quarter mile. I noticed the compaction pattern on the eastern slope. The access track is the logical connection. So they've been using that area before." "Multiple times. Based on the ruts, I'd say for at least a year." Emma was quiet for a moment. "They know the park?" "Intimately." "That narrows it." She stared into the darkness between the trees. "Park Service employees, or people with long-standing access, or law enforcement who've worked this sector." "Yes." "All of which points back to, I know." The fire was down to coals. The cabin had gone cold enough that their breath showed faintly in the dim light from the window. Lucas was about to say something else when Ranger came off his position by the door. Not gradually. Off. Switching from rest to full alert posture in a single movement, body low, head forward, eyes fixed on the front door. A sound reached them half a second later, a light, hollow clatter from somewhere on the porch, like something wooden had been set down, or placed. Lucas was already moving. He crossed to the rifle in 2 steps, chambered around with the bolt handled so quietly it made almost no noise, and positioned himself to the side of the front window where he could see the porch obliquely without exposing himself to anyone looking in. Emma had moved automatically to his left and pressed herself against the interior wall, hand reaching for where her service weapon would have been and finding nothing. She caught herself. Said nothing. The porch was empty, but resting against the front door, clearly visible through the gap at the bottom of the window frame, was a piece of rough-cut timber about 12 inches long. Someone had gouged letters into the wood. Deep, deliberate letters, pressed in with something sharp, like a knife tip or a nail. Even at an angle through the glass, in near darkness, Lucas could read it. Don't interfere. Next time, there will be a body. He stayed at the window for 90 seconds, motionless, scanning the full arc of visible tree line. Ranger had gone to the door and was standing rigid, nose working the gap at the threshold, a low sound in his chest that never quite became a growl. Whoever had placed it was already gone. Or they were standing exactly where the trees began, just past where the moonlight reached, watching the window to see the moment Lucas Mercer read what they'd written, waiting to see if it worked. Lucas didn't move from the window for a long time. 90 seconds, then 2 minutes, then 3. His breathing stayed controlled and shallow, the kind of discipline that doesn't come from yoga or meditation apps, but from crouching in places where making too much noise meant someone died. His eyes moved in a systematic pattern across the tree line, near edge, mid-depth, far shadow, the same grid he'd been trained to work at 22 years old and had never fully unlearned. Ranger stayed rigid at the door, that low chest sound continuing, a frequency more felt than heard. Emma hadn't moved either. She was pressed against the interior wall to his left, arms crossed, watching him watch the window. She didn't ask what he was doing, she didn't say anything. That kind of silence, choosing it rather than defaulting to it, told him more about her than any conversation so far. After 4 minutes, he stepped back from the window. "They're gone," he said. "You sure?" "No." He said it without hesitation. "But Ranger's dropping off. If someone were still in the immediate perimeter, he'd still be locked in." The dog had, almost on cue, reduced from full alert to something closer to watchful rest, still near the door, but the rigid line of his body had softened by degrees. Emma looked at the door. "You should let me go get it." "I'll get it." "It might be—" "I know what it might be." He set the rifle against the wall within reach and unlatched the door. "Stay inside, don't stand in the window frame." He opened the door fast, stepped out to the left rather than straight, and moved along the porch wall rather than across the open center of it. Old habits that his body executed before his mind finished the thought. The board was right where he'd seen it through the glass. He crouched, picked it up without touching the carved face. Not that he expected fingerprints, but old habits, and went back inside. He set it on the kitchen table under the single overhead light, and they both looked at it. The carving was deep and deliberate, not rushed. The letters were clean-edged, not ragged, which meant a sharp blade and slow pressure, not a frantic scratch. Someone who took their time. Someone who was calm enough out there in the dark and the cold to stand over a piece of timber and carve a full sentence while a German shepherd was 20 feet away on the other side of a door. That was its own kind of message. "They're not panicking," Emma said. "No. They expected to find me still in the truck. I should have been dead or close enough to it that they had time." She was looking at the board, but she was thinking somewhere else. Finding me this fast, finding you. That's a variable they didn't plan for, so instead of a second attempt tonight, they sent a calling card. She paused. "They're recalibrating, which means they'll come back with a better plan." "Yes." Lucas turned the board over. The back was clean, raw wood, no markings. He set it down and looked at Emma. She looked back at him. In the flat overhead light, the bruising around the butterfly strips was darker than it had been an hour ago, spreading in that deep, ugly way that bruises did when the underlying tissue damage was more significant than the surface wound. "You need to sleep," he said. "You need to stop telling me what I need. Then do it because it's tactically correct. You're running on no food, a head injury, and 16 hours of controlled fear response. Your decision-making degrades significantly in that state, and tomorrow we're going to need you thinking clearly." She stared at him. Controlled fear response. That's what it was. Most people would just say I was scared. "Were you?" A long pause. She looked at the board again. "Yes," she said simply. "The whole time." She went back to the couch. Lucas put the board on the shelf near the door, evidence, if it ever got that far, and resettled his position near the east window. He didn't plan to sleep. He hadn't planned to sleep in a long time, truthfully. Sleep was a narrow corridor with bad things on both sides of it, and he'd learned to spend as little time in it as possible. He sat in the dark and listened to the forest and waited for dawn. It came the way it always did up here, slowly, reluctantly, the black between the trees lightening to charcoal and then to a gray that had no warmth in it. A frost had settled overnight. He could see it on the ground through the east window, a a thin silver skin over the dead grass around the cabin. Emma was awake by 5:30. He heard her before he saw her. The particular quiet of someone moving through an unfamiliar space, careful and deliberate, not wanting to knock anything over in the dark. "Coffee?" he offered. "Please." He put water on. She came to the kitchen area and leaned against the counter with her arms crossed, looking better than she had any right to after the night she'd come from. The bruising was still dark, but her eyes were clear. The concussion hadn't worsened, which was about the best he could hope for. "I've been thinking," she said. "Okay." "Calling it in," and calling anyone, "is off the table until I know who's compromised. I accept that." She paused while he worked the camp stove. "But we can't just stay here. They know this location. Not precisely, but close enough." "Agreed. So what do you have in mind?" Lucas filled 2 cups and handed one to her. "There's an abandoned trapping camp 7 miles into the park interior. Northern sector, off the map. Not the current Park Service maps, anyway. An old survey map I found when I bought the property shows it as a series of structures from the 1940s. I've been past it twice. Nobody uses it, or nobody was using it 6 months ago." 7 miles is a hard walk in this terrain? Yes. You think the syndicate's operation might have left traces that far in? I think if they've been using that eastern access track for over a year, their operational footprint is larger than anyone's accounted for. He drank his coffee. It was bad. He'd run low on the decent stuff a week ago and was working through a can of off-brand grounds that tasted like scorched cardboard. And I think if Emma Collins is going to put Captain Victor Graves in a federal courtroom, she's going to need something more than suspicion and circumstantial timing. She was quiet for a moment, both hands around the cup. "You said his name again," she said. "Victor Graves. Without me telling you." "You told me last night." "I told you he was my supervisor. I told you his rank. I don't think I told you his first name." Lucas looked at her steadily. "Department photo. First names were listed with the ranks. I told you. I pay attention." Emma held his gaze for 3 full seconds. The look on her face was specific, not accusatory, not afraid, just precise. The look of someone filing a data point. "Okay," she said finally, and let it go. They ate crackers from a tin and peanut butter, which was what he had that was fast and calorie-dense. And Lucas laid out the terrain on a hand-drawn map he'd made for his own use over 2 years of running these trails. It wasn't detailed in the way a topographic survey would be. It was detailed in the way of a man who'd covered the same ground repeatedly and had an eye for the things that mattered: elevation changes, exposed ridgelines, natural choke points, water sources, sightline breaks. He showed Emma the route to the trapping camp. She followed it without him needing to explain the symbols. "You drew this yourself," she said. "Yes." "This detail. You mapped the sightlines." "Habit." She looked up from the map. Something had shifted in her expression, a question forming that she didn't ask. Instead, she looked back at the map and said, "What time do we move?" "As soon as it's light enough to move fast. Another 30 minutes. She nodded. She finished her coffee and handed the cup back, and he noticed she did it without looking. Placed it precisely where it would land securely on the counter without having to check. Spatial awareness as a reflex. Another data point he filed away. They dressed for the cold. Lucas added a layer under his jacket, checked his rifle and the Glock both, and handed Emma a compact folding knife from the drawer. A Benchmade 3-inch blade, solid construction. She looked at it for a moment. "I know how to use one," she said. "I know. I meant I'd prefer a firearm." "I know that too." He held her eyes. "When we know the ground better." She took the knife. They went out into the frost. The forest in early morning had a particular quality that Lucas had never found adequate words for and had stopped trying to describe. The cold pressed down from the canopy, and the light came through it, filtered and thin, everything silver gray and geometric, the trees standing like columns in a building that had lost its roof. Their breath showed in small clouds. Ranger moved ahead with his nose low and his tail in the horizontal position that meant he was reading the ground rather than the air, tracking or checking what had moved through here in the night. Something had. Lucas saw it within the first quarter mile, boot prints in the frost. 2 sets, moving parallel, east to west across their intended path. Recent, the frost crystals inside the prints were still intact, which meant within the last hour, before sunrise had softened anything. He stopped. Emma stopped behind him. He crouched over the prints and looked at them without touching. Boot tread, lug pattern, work boots or hiking boots, not military pattern. Size 11 or 12, both sets roughly the same. Two people of similar build moving side by side, which meant they were comfortable in the terrain and not worried about single-file stealth. They were moving as if they owned the ground. Two people, Emma said quietly, crouching beside him, moving west. Away from the cabin. Or looping around it. He stood. Recalculated the route meant the most direct path to the trapping camp ran northwest. The boot tracks cut across it. If those two people continued their current bearing, they'd intersect with the fire road about a mile out, which gave them vehicle access. If they were looping, they'd be on his left flank within 30 minutes. New route, he said. They went north before northwest, adding distance but moving through denser cover where the frost was interrupted by canopy and the prints they left were harder to read. Ranger adjusted without being redirected. The dog was navigating by nose now, moving in a loose pattern ahead of them, and his body language stayed low and focused, but not alarmed, which Lucas took as a cautiously positive indicator. The trapping camp revealed itself through the trees gradually. First a rusted fence post listing at 45 degrees, then a stretch of wire so old it had oxidized to the color of the undergrowth and nearly vanished into it. Then the corner of a structure, plank walls grayed to the texture of old bone. There were 4 buildings, 2 large enough to stand in, 2 smaller, probably storage. All of them in the advanced stages of the kind of decay that happened when wood was left to the mercy of high-altitude winters for 80 years. But they were standing, which was more than he'd expected. Lucas moved to the largest structure first, checked the exterior for any signs of recent disturbance, found the door, hanging from one hinge and partially blocked by undergrowth, and eased through it. The interior smelled of rust and rot, and something underneath both of those, something chemical and sharper that didn't belong to the natural decay of an 80-year-old building. He stopped. Emma came through the door behind him and stopped too. "You smell that?" she asked. "Yes." They stood still while their eyes adjusted. The interior was a single room about 30 feet by 20. Old steel trapping equipment hung from the wall, coil spring leg traps, various sizes, so corroded they'd crumble if you tried to open them. Rusted hooks, and a pulley system bolted to the ceiling beam for hanging carcasses. A workbench along the back wall. But it wasn't the antique trapping equipment that held his attention. It was what someone had placed among it. Along the right wall, stacked against the old equipment like they'd been hidden in plain sight, were a series of reinforced plastic cases, the kind used for sensitive equipment transport, waterproof, foam-padded, with pressure seal latches. 6 of them. 3 large, 3 small. All closed. On the workbench, a chemical smell strong enough to catch at the back of the throat. 2 glass containers, empty, residue stained on the inside with a brownish crystalline deposit. A length of industrial tubing. A pump mechanism. And on a shelf above the bench, weighted down under one of the rusted traps to keep them from moving, a sheaf of papers. Emma went for the papers before Lucas reached the cases. She lifted the trap aside without hesitating, pulled the papers free, and spread them on the cleaner section of the bench. He came to stand beside her. Maps. Printed survey maps with handwritten annotations in 2 different ink colors. One that had faded to brown, one that was recent and black. The black annotations were route markings, timing notations, grid references. Transportation routes, Lucas understood immediately. Not hiking routes. Logistics routes. Entry and exit paths, waypoints, and at 3 locations. A small symbol he recognized as a standard field indicator for a cache site. Below the maps, printed forms. Manifests of some kind formatted like wildlife research documentation. Scientific notation, species classifications, weights, processing volumes. But the species weren't native to this region. South American caiman, Indonesian pit vipers. Central African civet. Animals that had no business being in any quantity within 1,000 miles of Black Ridge National Forest. And below those, a set of signed authorization forms. Emma went very still. He watched her read. He watched her face and said nothing. Whatever she was reading was doing something to her that she wasn't going to show in any obvious way. No gasp, no visible reaction, none of the performed shock of someone who wants you to know they're shocked. But her jaw tightened. Her right hand on the bench stopped being relaxed. The tendons on the back of it rose slightly. Emma. She didn't answer for a moment. Then she picked up the top authorization form and held it at an angle toward the light coming through the cracked boards of the wall. A signature at the bottom. Clear and firm, the signature of someone who signed a lot of documents and had no reason to be uncertain about it. V. Graves, Captain, Holt County Sheriff's Department. Below the signature, a date from 4 months ago. And a departmental authorization stamp, the real kind, not a photocopy, the kind you had to have physical access to the stamp to produce. He didn't just protect them, Emma said. Her voice was level, but something underneath it wasn't. He signed their transport manifests. He was authorizing the shipments. Lucas looked at the stamp on the form. How many people have access to that stamp? In the department? She set the form down. 3. The captain, the chief administrative officer, and the department head. She looked at the pile of forms. How many? She started counting. 8, 9, 12 forms, each with the same signature and stamp. He did this 12 times, at minimum. 4 months ago to 2 weeks ago. This one, she pointed without touching. 14 days before he called me to that parking lot. Lucas looked at the chemical residue in the glass containers and at the cases along the wall. We need what's in those cases. They could be trapped. Yes. He studied them from a distance, looking at the latch mechanisms and the way they were positioned. No tripwires visible, no unusual attachments. The cases were clean-sided and the latches were standard issue. I don't think they are. These are operational storage, not defensive. They weren't expecting anyone to find this. They weren't expecting me to be found, Emma said. He looked at her. If I'm dead in a ravine, she said, this camp stays buried indefinitely. No one knows to look for it. I'm the only one who had the investigative thread that pointed here, and with me gone, that thread dies. She paused. So they didn't need to trap the cases. They just needed me to disappear. Lucas crossed to the first case, crouched in front of it, and examined the latches closely. Standard pressure release catches, no modifications. He clicked one open. Inside, packed in foam cutouts, glass sample vials sealed and labeled. 12 per tray, 2 trays per case. The labels were in a scientific shorthand he couldn't fully decode, but the chemical compound names were long and precise, in the way that synthetic organic chemistry notation was precise. Nothing natural in those strings of letters and numbers. The stimulants. Or the precursors. Or both. He closed the case. We take the forms, he said. The authorization pages. The maps with the route annotations. We leave the cases. Emma looked at him sharply. Leave them? We need chain of custody to survive a courtroom. We don't have evidence bags, we don't have documentation protocol, and if we carry those vials and they get challenged in court as improperly collected, they walk. They walk. He straightened. But the forms with Graves' signature and stamp, those are self-authenticating. They prove his involvement regardless of where we found them, because the stamp and signature can be verified independently. We photograph what we can't carry. Emma stared at him for a moment. You know evidence protocol. I know what happens when you don't follow it. She looked like she wanted to ask something more specific. Instead, she pulled out her phone, which he hadn't even known she still had, and opened the camera. The battery's at 11%, she said. I had it on airplane mode. Move fast. She moved fast. She photographed every document, every case, every label she could read, the chemical containers, the pump, the wall-hung trapping equipment that had been used as camouflage. Lucas gathered the authorization forms and the annotated maps, folding them into the inner pocket of his jacket as carefully as the space allowed. They were in the camp for 11 minutes total. They were 6 minutes into the return route when Ranger's head snapped up and the dog went rigid in the precise way he had by the door of the cabin the night before. Lucas pulled up immediately. Both of them stopped, standing motionless in the dappled gray light between the pines. Lucas listened. Wind, the creak of branches, the soft drip of frost melting from the higher canopy as the temperature began to rise. And then a voice, somewhere behind and to the east, muffled by distance and timber, but unmistakably a voice. Then a second voice answering. 2 people. The same 2 people whose prints had crossed their path earlier, or a different pair? He couldn't tell. He signaled Emma, right hand low, a flat pushing gesture, hold. She read it correctly and didn't move. He counted seconds. 30, 45. The voices didn't get closer. They weren't moving toward him, or if they were moving slowly and at an angle. His best read on the bearing was that they were positioned somewhere between the trapping camp and the fire road, which meant if they'd been watching the camp, they'd seen Lucas and Emma enter it, and they were now moving to cut off the eastern exit route. The eastern exit route that was the most direct path back to the cabin. He adjusted their heading west without speaking, using hand signals only. Emma followed without question. Ranger moved out to their left flank and stayed there, ears in rotation, reading the forest in all directions. They moved for 20 minutes in near silence, circling wide, adding distance and time, but keeping the sound of those voices from getting closer. Lucas ran the terrain in his head as they moved, mapping where they were against the hand-drawn contours he'd memorized, identifying the next choke point, the next piece of high ground, the next tree line that offered cover. He was doing this automatically, without effort, the way his body ran trails. The tactical computation just happened, layered under the conscious mind, and he only noticed it when he caught Emma watching him from the corner of his eye. Watching his hands, his eyes, the way he moved, with the focused attention of someone taking notes. He didn't acknowledge it. They reached the cabin at 9:45 in the morning, coming in from the northwest, Ranger entering the perimeter first and clearing it with a fast circuit of the building before settling at the door. Lucas went through the cabin quickly, checked each room in the loft and the storage room, and came back out. "Clear," he said. Emma sat down heavily on the porch steps. Not defeated, she wasn't the type to make a performance out of exhaustion, but her body simply announcing its limits in the flat, undeniable way bodies did. She'd been running on thin sleep and adrenaline and crackers since the day before, and the 7-mile round trip at pace had drawn down the last of the functional reserve. Lucas sat on the porch rail and looked at the tree line and thought, the forms in his jacket pocket. Graves's signature 12 times across a set of documents that authorized the transport of illegally acquired animal compounds across state lines. The annotated maps showing a logistics network that had been running for over a year. Emma's photographs. 11% battery had been enough for 43 images, she'd told him on the walk back. Everything would need to go to federal law enforcement. Not state, not county, federal specifically, because any state-level submission that passed through Holt County channels was a known point of compromise. The question was how. "I need to think about who I can call," Emma said. "Federal?" "Yes, I have a contact. I had one. I haven't been in touch for 8 months." She pressed her fingers against her eyes briefly. "A special agent I worked with 2 years ago on a case that touched wildlife trafficking. Different state, different operation, but he was clean as far as I could tell." "Name?" "Briggs. Noah Briggs. I was out of the Denver field office at the time. I don't know if he still is." "Can you reach him without going through official channels?" "He gave me a personal cell number at the end of that case." She dropped her hands. "I wrote it in the back of my personal planner, not in any departmental system." "Where's the planner?" "At my apartment." A pause. "Which they probably have access to." Lucas said nothing for a moment. "I have a personal email memorized," Emma said. "Not a department address, private account. He might have something connected to it." "Might." "It's what we have." He looked at the satellite phone on the shelf inside, visible through the open door. Not a traceable number, prepaid and registered to a false name he'd set up 3 years ago for reasons that had seemed practical at the time and now seemed almost prophetically useful. If Emma sent an email through a private account from a non-law enforcement device on a satellite connection, it would take real effort to intercept and trace. Not impossible, but real effort. "Write the email here before you send it," he said. "I want to read it first." She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You want to vet my communication to a federal agent. I want to make sure it doesn't include anything that tells anyone where we are before we decide we want them to know." She held the look for another moment. Then she said, "Fair." He handed her a notepad and a pen from the kitchen drawer, and she sat at the table and wrote. He watched her write and didn't hover over it, giving her the space to think through it. The fire had died to cold ash. He started it again while she worked, feeding it small wood first, and then larger pieces. and the warmth came back into the room gradually. She finished and passed him the notepad. It was concise and smart. It named herself, stated that she was alive and in secure location, and that she had evidence of criminal conspiracy involving a named ranking law enforcement official. It asked for a response to a specific email address she'd written at the bottom. It included one piece of identifying information that would confirm to Briggs it was her, a reference to a case detail that only she and he would know. And it asked him to acknowledge receipt through the same account and include the phrase high altitude if his line was clean. It contained no location, no physical description of where she was, no names other than her own. "Good," he said. Something in her expression shifted slightly. Not gratitude exactly. More like the wary acknowledgement of someone who'd expected to have to fight for something and found they didn't. She sent the email from the satellite connection, and they sat and waited. Outside, the frost had melted and the forest dripped. Ranger lay near the fireplace and watched the door. The authorization forms from Victor Graves sat in the inner pocket of Lucas's jacket, and the cabin was quiet, and for a few hours nothing moved. At 3:17 in the afternoon, Emma's borrowed email client loaded a response. 2 words. High altitude. She looked at Lucas. He nodded once. They had a line out. What came back through it in the following hour was methodical and careful. Briggs was clearly reading her situation correctly, asking only what he needed, giving only what was necessary. He was still in Denver. He could move a small team within 48 hours to a location of their choosing that was outside Holt County jurisdiction. He needed the physical evidence and the documents, and he needed her alive to testify. He also sent one additional line that he didn't explain. "Don't move from your current location until I say so." The situation has developed. Emma read it twice. "The situation has developed," she said. "He knows something we don't," Lucas said. "Something that makes him want us stationary." "Yes." She looked at the screen for a moment longer. Then she set the phone down on the table and looked at her hands. The zip tie marks were still visible on her wrists. The skin discolored, not badly, but enough to see. She'd been staring at them for a moment before she seemed to realize she was doing it, and stopped. "You doing okay?" Lucas asked. It was the first time he'd asked her that since the truck. She looked up. The question seemed to land differently than she expected. "I'll manage," she said. And then, after a pause that felt like it cost her something to fill, "You?" He looked at the fire. "I'll manage," he said. Ranger got up from near the fireplace, walked across the room, and lay down directly between them, his big head resting on his front paws, eyes forward. Neither Lucas nor Emma said anything about it. The dog did what the dog did, and sometimes that was enough. The afternoon light was going amber and then going gray, and the forest outside was settling into the particular quiet of late autumn dusk when something shifted. Not a sound. Not exactly. More like a pressure change, the way the air in a room changes when someone walks into it. Ranger's head came up. Lucas was already at the window. 4 shadows at the tree line. Not 2. 4. Moving spread, not bunched. Someone who knew about field spacing, about not clustering targets. Moving toward the cabin from 3 angles simultaneously, the 4th working around the north side toward the back. Lucas had about 90 seconds. He looked at Emma. She was already up. She'd seen his posture change, and she was standing in the center of the room with the folding knife open in her right hand and her weight forward on the balls of her feet. And her face in that moment was the face of someone who has decided, fully and without reservation, what they are prepared to do. He reached under the workbench along the east wall and pulled out the pre-packed go bag. He'd done this 2 hours ago, quietly, without announcing it, while Emma was resting. Water, first aid, the documents, hard food. He passed it to her. Then he picked up the rifle. Outside, somewhere in the dark between the trees, a branch snapped. And then 3 things happened almost simultaneously. The first noise trap he'd spent the late afternoon rigging, a line of tin cans strung between the eastern pines, erupted in a cascade of metallic clatter. A flashlight beam swept across the south window, and from the back of the cabin, the reinforced rear door shook once, hard, against its outward swinging frame. Ranger didn't bark. He launched. Ranger hit the back door at full speed, and the impact shook the frame loud enough to rattle the single picture on the east wall. a topographic print Lucas had pinned there 2 years ago and never looked at anymore. The dog didn't go through the door. He hit it and bounced back and stood there with his body angled and his hackles in a full ridge from his skull to his tail, making a sound that wasn't quite barking and wasn't quite growling, but was the specific frequency between the two that meant something real was on the other side. Lucas was already moving. He crossed the cabin in 4 steps, killed the overhead light with his elbow without breaking stride, and positioned himself against the interior wall to the left of the back door. Complete darkness now except for the dying firelight, which threw everything into orange geometry and moving shadow. He heard Emma move behind him, not toward him, not away, sideways. And when his eyes adjusted, he could see she'd pressed herself against the interior wall to the right of the room's center, the folding knife low in her right hand, her back to solid wood. Good position. Field of view to both doors, not in the line of fire from either window. She'd done that without being told. The back door shook again. Once. Then nothing. The tin cans on the east line were still swinging, their clattering fading out into the cold air. The flashlight beam from the south window swept across the ceiling once more and then cut off. Lucas counted. 1, 2, 3. Whatever was about to happen, they'd already decided to do it, and the only variable left was timing. These weren't amateurs reading a situation and trying to figure out their next move. These were people executing a plan. The noise traps had flagged them early, but they hadn't stopped or scattered. They'd adjusted. And people who adjusted to contact instead of retreating were either trained or experienced, and in this context both options landed the same way. He thought about the back door. Outward swinging, solid core, 3-inch screws in the reinforced strike plate. It would take a significant physical effort to breach it, and the effort would be loud and slow. So if they were smart, and they were adjusting, so they were at least partially smart, they wouldn't breach the back door. The back door was a diversion. He looked at the south windows. Both were single-pane glass and wood frames that he'd been meaning to replace since he moved in and hadn't. Each frame was large enough for a person to come through, and the flashlight from the south had cut off, which meant whoever was carrying it had either moved or gone to ground, and people went to ground before they moved fast. He left the back door. Emma tracked him with her eyes as he crossed to the south wall and flattened against it between the 2 windows. He held up 2 fingers, pointed south, then held up 1 finger and swept it toward the east window. She processed it, nodded once, moved to a position that gave her the angle he'd indicated. 20 seconds of silence so complete he could hear the coals settling in the fireplace. Then the east window came in. Not the glass. Someone had enough discipline not to come through breaking glass. The frame came in, the entire unit popped from its housing with a single hard push from outside, and it fell inward and hit the floor, and the figure came through the opening in the same motion, feet first, fast, and landed in the room already turning toward the center. Ranger was on him before he fully oriented. The dog covered the distance in 2 strides and hit the man in the chest with enough mass and momentum to take him off his feet entirely. They went down together in a crash of limbs, and the man yelled, short and sharp, cut off immediately. And Ranger had his forearm pinned before he could bring whatever was in his hand to bear. Lucas heard something heavy clatter against the floorboards. A sidearm, he registered. Large caliber from the sound. He crossed to them in 2 steps. The man was fighting Ranger with his free arm and doing reasonably well. He had size and he wasn't panicking, which told Lucas something. But the pinned arm was fully committed, and he couldn't get the leverage to break it. Lucas dropped a knee onto his chest, drove the air out of him, and pressed the rifle barrel against his collarbone at an angle that communicated very clearly that the conversation was over. The man went still. 32 years old, maybe 35. Short hair, 3-day stubble. Jaw clenched so tight the muscles at his temples were visibly bunched. A bruise beginning under his right eye where Ranger's initial impact had connected with something. Work jacket, not tactical, the kind you bought at a farm supply store. Trying to look like he belonged in these woods, which meant he was used to operating with some degree of cover. Ranger, Lucas said. The dog released the arm but didn't back off. He planted himself 6 inches from the man's face and stayed there. Lucas looked at the man. The man looked at the rifle barrel. Where are the other 3? Lucas said. Nothing. I'm not going to ask you again. I've got one cornered near the old woodshed, Emma's voice from the east side of the room, steady and low. He stopped moving when he heard Ranger. Lucas didn't look away from the man on the floor. Tell him to put it down. She spoke toward the open window frame, her voice carrying, You outside, put the weapon on the ground and show me your hands. You've heard what just happened in here. I'm a sheriff's deputy, and right now you're looking at a federal charge. You want to add assault on a law enforcement officer to that? A long pause. A silence that had texture to it. Then the sound of something heavy being set down on frozen ground. Hands, Emma said. They're up, came a voice from outside. Young, tight with fear. They're up, okay? We were just supposed to watch the cabin. Nobody said anything about, Don't move. She looked at Lucas. He looked at the man beneath his knee. That's two. Where are the other two? The man's jaw worked. Something was happening behind his eyes. Calculation, assessment, the specific arithmetic of someone running the odds on their current situation and not liking the numbers on any side. South tree line, he said. 50 meters. They were supposed to come in after He stopped. After you breached the east window, Lucas finished, and the back door was the diversion. The man said nothing, which confirmed it. Lucas looked toward the south windows. 50 meters. In the dark, with no light source, that meant they couldn't see into the cabin clearly, and they would know the entry team had failed. The question was what their orders were for that scenario. Hold, extract, or escalate. He made a decision. Emma, can you hold him from the window? Yes. Call toward the south tree line. Same thing. Deputy identification, federal charge, weapons down. She moved to the south window and her voice went out into the dark, carrying flat and clear across the frost-brittle ground. Lucas listened to the silence that followed and watched the man on the floor and thought about variables. There were too many. 4 men, 2 neutralized, 2 in the tree line with unknown orders from an unknown command structure. The physical evidence in his jacket, Emma alive and functional, and a direct threat to Victor Graves' career and freedom. Briggs in Denver, who had said, don't move for reasons he hadn't explained. The don't move instruction nagged at him. From the south tree line, nothing. No response to Emma's call. No sound of weapons on ground, no hands showing, which meant they'd either gone or they were patient. Lucas. Emma's voice changed register, flat and controlled, but carrying something underneath it. He looked at her. She was looking at the man on the floor. His jacket, she said. Lucas looked at the jacket. Right breast pocket. Something rectangular and hard-edged pushing against the fabric. He reached into the pocket with his left hand, keeping the rifle in position with his right, and pulled out a laminated card. He turned it over. A Holt County Sheriff's Department identification card. The photo matched the face on the floor. The name read Deputy Keith Marin. Rank, Patrol Deputy. Lucas looked at the man's face. Deputy Keith Marin looked back at him with the expression of someone who has been caught and knows it and is trying to decide whether to lean into that or away from it. You're on the job, Lucas said. Was, Marin said. Something bitter in the single syllable. Who sent you out here? Marin's jaw tightened again. Lucas watched it happen. The man was running fear on one side and loyalty, or something that used to be loyalty and had become something more transactional, on the other, and neither side was winning. You came into this building through a window, Lucas said. You had a loaded sidearm. Emma Collins is a law enforcement officer in your department who was found bound and left in a ravine 24 hours ago. You want to tell me you came out here for a social visit? Marin's eyes shifted to Emma, held there for a moment with something complicated in them. Not quite shame, not quite its absence either. They told us she'd gone rogue, Marin said, that she was involved with the trafficking, that she'd gone off the map to avoid arrest. Emma said nothing. Her face didn't move. And they sent 4 deputies to bring her back, Lucas said, through a window, with firearms. They said she was armed and had a civilian accomplice who was dangerous. Marin's voice had gone flat. He was hearing it himself, saying it out loud, and it didn't hold the way it must have when someone else said it to him. They said non-compliant extraction. Who's they? A pause that lasted long enough to mean something. Graves, Marin said finally. Captain Graves gave the order. The fire popped. Ranger hadn't moved from his position near Marin's head. Emma crossed the room and crouched down across from Lucas, at Marin's eye level. When she spoke, her voice was very quiet, which made it more effective than if she'd raised it. Keith. Look at me. He did. I need you to think about this. Not what Graves told you. Think about what you know. Have you seen a single piece of documentation that says I'm under investigation? A warrant? A supervisor's report? Anything? Marin was quiet. Because if there were a legitimate case against me, Emma said, there would be a paper trail. There would be other department heads involved. There would be oversight. And you wouldn't be extracting me through a cabin window in the dark with 3 other guys and no body cams. She watched his face. Were you wearing body cams tonight, Keith? His eyes closed briefly. No, he said. No, Emma repeated. Because what happens tonight isn't supposed to be on record. She stood up. Graves sent you out here to clean up. You and 3 other guys who either believe what he told you or needed the money badly enough not to ask questions. And when this goes wrong, and it already has, you're the one holding the bag, not him. The man outside the window had gone completely quiet, listening. Lucas had factored that in. The 2 in the south tree line, Lucas said to Marin. Did they get Graves' briefing or did they get yours? Marin looked at the ceiling. Mine. So they know the same story you knew. Yeah. Lucas stood up and looked at Emma. She looked back at him. A moment of silent calculation passed between them. Not a long one, but real. And then she nodded slightly. He crossed to the south window. Here's the situation, he said, projecting his voice out into the dark without raising it to a shout, using the pitch that carried in open terrain. Your partner is in here. He's not hurt. He's going to stay not hurt as long as this stays calm. I'm not law enforcement. I'm a civilian who found a kidnapped deputy in my woods. You can choose what happens next, but understand that the man who sent you out here tonight didn't send you because you matter to him. He sent you because you're expendable. Come in or go. Either way, I'm calling federal agents at first light. Silence. Then, from the direction of the woodshed, the voice that had put his hands up earlier. Garrett, what do we do? A longer silence from the south tree line, then, stand down. Lucas exhaled slowly through his nose. He didn't move from the window. Stand down means what? Exactly, he said. Means we're done. The voice from the south was older than the other one, controlled, someone who'd made the arithmetic work in real time. We're going to walk back to the road. We don't want any part of this. Leave the weapons. Another pause. That's department property. Leave them or don't leave, Lucas said. But if you take them, we treat this differently. The longest pause yet. 2 thuds in the dark, soft and heavy, like weapons set on frozen ground. Then retreating footsteps, fading into the trees, moving back toward the fire road. Lucas stood at the window until he couldn't hear them anymore. Ranger had finally sat down, which was a reliable indicator that the immediate perimeter had cleared. The dog wasn't infallible, but he was better than most sensors Lucas had worked with. He turned back to the room. Marin had gotten himself upright and was sitting against the wall with his arms around his knees, looking at the floor between his feet. The gun he'd brought in was on the floor 5 feet away. Lucas had kicked it aside when he first pinned him. And Marin wasn't looking at it, which was a choice that communicated something. The man outside the woodshed window, early 20s, wide-eyed, a kid who'd made a very bad choice for what were probably very ordinary financial reasons, was still standing with his hands visible. Emma told him to come around to the front door. He did. His name was Danny Purcell. He was 26. He'd been on the force for 11 months. He looked like he was considering crying and was fighting it with everything he had. Lucas made coffee, and nobody commented on the absurdity of that. The 4 of them sat in the cabin, Lucas on the stool, Emma at the table, Marin against the wall, Purcell on the bench near the door. And the fire rebuilt itself, and the coffee was still bad, and Ranger finally lay down in the center of the room like he was establishing neutral ground. Marin talked. Once he started, he was methodical about it, which told Lucas the man had probably been carrying this for a while, and the relief of setting it down was greater than whatever remained of his loyalty to Graves. He'd known about the operational leaks for 8 months. He'd suspected the source was command level for 6. He'd approached Graves directly, not accusatorially, framed as a concern, 4 months ago, and Graves had given him a clean and reassuring response that Marin had chosen to believe because the alternative was something he wasn't ready to look at directly. He told you what you needed to hear, Emma said. Yes. And you let him. Marin looked at his hands. Yeah. How many others in the department are on his payroll? I don't know. Truly, I don't have names. I know it's not most of them. This is a small department, and most of these guys they're just people doing the job. He paused. I think it's 3, maybe 4. People he promoted, people who owe him. Administrative access, the stamp? Marin's face changed. The departmental stamp. You found paperwork. Answer the question. Graves controls the stamp, has for 6 years. There was a procedural change after Chief Alderton retired, and Graves absorbed some of the administrative authority that should have gone to a committee. It was... He stopped. Nobody thought much of it at the time. Emma looked at Lucas. He was leaning against the fireplace with his coffee, watching Marin, and when she looked at him, he gave her the smallest head movement. He's telling the truth. Based on what? She didn't need to ask. She'd seen enough of how he read people in the last 24 hours to trust the read. Keith, she said, I need you to decide something, right now, in this room. Marin looked up. You can walk out of here the same way those other 2 walked. I don't have the authority to detain you, and frankly, right now, I don't have the resources to make that complicated. Or you can stay and you can tell everything you've told me tonight to a federal agent within the next 48 hours. On record. And what happens to you will be significantly different in each scenario. She paused. But I'm not going to make you choose. That's not my job. My job is to tell you those are the options. Marin stared at the floor for a long time. Purcell, across the room, was watching him. 26 years old and 11 months on the force. And he was watching the older deputy like a man watching someone decide something he himself would have to decide next. I'll stay, Marin said. Emma nodded once. No visible relief, no dramatization, just acknowledgement. Same, Purcell said quietly. Nobody made anything of that either. The night went long. Lucas rigged secondary noise traps on the approach from the fire road, basic construction, paracord, and tin cans. Nothing sophisticated, but loud enough to buy 30 seconds, and checked the perimeter twice, Ranger on his left each time. The south tree line was empty. The woodshed was empty. The 2 who'd walked away had kept walking, and he believed they were gone, not because he was optimistic about human nature, but because the calculation was honest. They had nothing to gain by coming back in a narrowing window of plausible deniability that was worth protecting. He came back inside and sat at the table and unfolded the authorization forms from his jacket and spread them in better light. 12 forms. Graves' signature on every one. The departmental stamp, clear and clean. Date spanning 14 months. Animal compound volumes that, even to Lucas's non-specialist eye, represented an industrial scale of extraction. He photographed each one with the satellite phone's camera. Backup for the backup. At 2 in the morning, Emma fell asleep at the table with her head on her arms, and Lucas covered her with the wool blanket and didn't wake her. Marin and Purcell were on the floor near the fireplace. Marin asleep, and Purcell staring at the ceiling with his eyes open, running whatever he was running through his head in the private way that people did when they realized their life had just divided into before and after. Lucas sat by the window and looked at the dark. He thought about Graves. Not tactically. He'd been doing that unconsciously for hours, and the tactical picture was reasonably clear. He thought about the fact of him. A man who'd been trusted for 22 years, who'd trained Emma Collins, who'd put her in zip ties in a blue pickup in a ravine and left her there, and then carved a message to the civilian who'd found her as if the whole thing were a professional inconvenience rather than a human life. That kind of compartmentalization didn't happen overnight. It was built, maintained, decided every day over years. Lucas had known men like that, not many, but enough to recognize the architecture. And what he knew from those encounters was that such men were genuinely dangerous not because they were uncontrolled, but because they were the opposite. Everything calculated, everything managed. When that kind of person felt the walls closing in, they didn't panic. They cleared the board. At 3:45, the satellite phone lit up. A message from Briggs. 8 words. Graves filed a missing persons report. For you, Emma. Lucas read it twice. The missing persons report was smart. It established Graves as the concerned commanding officer, put Emma in the system as an official missing deputy, and created a legitimate framework for any law enforcement contact that might result from her being found alive. If federal agents arrived and tried to take her into protective custody, Graves could insert himself into that process through official channels. He could control the narrative at the moment when controlling it mattered most. Lucas woke Emma with a hand on her shoulder. She came awake fast. Not disoriented, alert within a second, sitting upright, eyes clear. He handed her the phone. She read it. Her face did something he hadn't seen it do yet. A tightening that went deeper than the reactions she'd shown before. Deeper than finding the forms in the trapping camp. Deeper than reading Graves' signature. Deeper even than the moment when she'd understood he'd been the one who called her to that parking lot. This was the expression of something that should have remained abstract becoming concrete. The missing persons report meant Graves was still playing offense. He hadn't retracted. He hadn't run. He was doubling down, extending his reach, using the institutional machinery he controlled to come at her through official channels with a face that looked concerned. "He's going to try to be the one who finds me," she said. "Yes. If he gets to me first." She stopped, recalibrated. "We need Briggs here before Graves can maneuver into position." "I know. Can we make that happen faster?" Lucas thought about it. 48 hours was what Briggs had estimated. A small team, outside Holt County jurisdiction, moving on a compressed timeline. That required authorization and logistics that didn't collapse cleanly under pressure. "We can give him a better reason," Lucas said. "The forms. And the witnesses." He looked toward the fireplace. Marin asleep. Purcell still awake, watching them now, listening without pretending not to. Two law enforcement officers who received direct orders from Graves and can testify to the structure of the operation. Emma looked at Purcell. "You willing to put that on record before this is over?" Purcell sat up. He was quiet for a moment, and in that moment he looked very young and also very certain, the particular combination that sometimes happened when people got pushed far enough past their comfort to find something harder on the other side. "Yes," he said. Emma looked back at Lucas. Something passed between them. Not warmth, not yet, but the thing that was adjacent to it, the recognition of another person's competence and steadiness in conditions designed to erode both. "Then we tell Briggs we have corroborating witnesses and physical documentation, and we need him in 36 hours, not 48, she said. "And if he says 48 is the floor?" "Then we hold the line for 48 hours in a cabin with two deputies who have questionable loyalties and a man in a law enforcement uniform actively hunting me through official channels." She said it without flinching. "So we'd better make sure Briggs moves faster." Lucas looked at her for a moment. "You don't sleep enough," he said. "You don't sleep at all," she said. He picked up the satellite phone. He wrote the message to Briggs in 3 sentences. Physical evidence, signed documentation with departmental authentication, 2 law enforcement witnesses willing to testify to direct command orders from the named subject. Target is using official channels, and the window is closing. Requesting accelerated timeline, 36 hours. He sent it and set the phone down. The fire had settled to a deep, steady burn. Outside, the forest was somewhere past 3 in the morning, that particular middle dark hour when everything living had gone quiet, and the cold was at its most severe. Ranger was asleep near the hearth for the first time all night, which was the most honest indicator of the situation Lucas had. If the dog was sleeping, the perimeter was clear. He allowed himself to lean back in the chair. Not sleep, he wasn't going to sleep, but the physical release of a posture that had been operational for 20 straight hours. His knee was bothering him. It always bothered him in sustained cold, a souvenir from an operation he wasn't cleared to discuss, even now, involving a vehicle accident that wasn't an accident in a country he hadn't been invited to. He pressed his palm against it out of habit, applied pressure, felt the familiar deep ache subside to its usual background level. Some things didn't heal, they just became manageable. The phone lit up at 4:11. "Briggs." 4 words. 36 hours. "Don't move." Emma was reading over his shoulder. He felt her exhale once, controlled, and then she straightened. 36 hours, she said. "Yes." She looked at the window. The dark outside had not changed at all. 36 hours was a long time in a situation that was degrading. Graves knew roughly where the cabin was. The original message on the board had been delivered here, which meant his people had been here. With the missing persons report active and 2 of his 4-man team unaccounted for and not reporting back, he was going to know that the extraction had failed. He would adjust again. He was the kind of man who kept adjusting. He's going to send more, Emma said, and next time it won't be deputies who can be talked down. I know. What does that mean for the cabin? Lucas looked at the walls, the windows, the door, the structural geometry he'd already mapped 20 times over in the last 2 days. He thought about what he had and what he could build from it in 36 hours. He thought about the terrain outside, the approaches, the choke points, the sight lines. He thought about a lot of things he hadn't done in years and hadn't missed, and was now doing with the same ease he breathed. It means, he said, we stop waiting for them to come to us. Emma looked at him. We already have the evidence, he said. We have witnesses. We have a federal contact moving. The only thing Graves has left is the physical space between now and when Briggs gets here. He paused. So we make that space as difficult for him to operate in as possible. She was quiet for a moment, reading something in his expression that he wasn't fully conscious of showing. You've done this before, she said. Not anything like this exactly, but this, planning, counting assets and threats and terrain. She paused. You look different when you're doing it. Something changes. Lucas didn't answer immediately. Does it? He said. Yes. She held his eyes. Who were you exactly? Before Blackridge. The fire. The sleeping men. The dog. Lucas looked at the window where the dark was beginning, very faintly, barely perceptibly, to soften at the edges toward the gunmetal gray that came before dawn. Someone who got very good at keeping people alive, he said, in places where that was a difficult thing to do. He stood up and picked up the rifle and went to check the perimeter. The perimeter check took 12 minutes. Lucas moved the full circuit of the cabin in the pre-dawn dark, starting at the northeast corner and working clockwise, staying inside the first tree line where the shadows were deepest. Ranger moved with him, 4 feet out on his left, nose down on the approach paths, and then up on the open ground between the trees and the cabin walls. The frost had come back hard. His breath clouded and the dead grass crunched under careful footsteps he couldn't fully silence, which bothered him more than the cold. Nothing on the north side. Nothing on the east, where the broken window frame was still sitting on the floor inside, and the gap in the wall was covered with a wool blanket he'd tacked up with the 4 finishing nails he'd found in the bottom of the toolbox. It would stop the wind, not a person. He'd already accounted for that. The south approach was clear. The weapons the 2 retreating deputies had left behind were still on the ground where they'd dropped them. 2 department-issue Glocks, both in the frost now, which was going to require function checking before they were reliable. He picked them up without touching the trigger guards and carried them back inside. The west side took longer because the terrain there was broken, and the approach was channeled between 2 outcroppings of granite that created dead ground he couldn't fully see into without moving further from the cabin than he wanted to. He stood at the edge of the dead ground and listened for 90 seconds and heard nothing except wind and the distant sound of the creek that ran through the low ground a half-mile west. Ranger's body stayed relaxed. Lucas went back inside. He cleared the ice off the Glocks with a dry cloth, function-checked both, loaded the chambers, and set them on the table. Marin was awake. I was sitting up near the fireplace with his knees drawn up and his eyes on Lucas, watching the weapons being processed with the attention of someone whose professional training made it automatic. You do that a lot? Marin said. What? Perimeter checks. When it's indicated. Marin was quiet for a moment. Those 2 who walked, Garrett and Sims, they'll report back to someone. I know. Not necessarily Graves directly. There's a dispatcher on overnight who routes to Graves for anything flagged sensitive. He paused. Which means Graves will know the extraction failed before sunrise. Lucas looked at him. And you're telling me this because I should have told somebody something a long time ago, and I didn't. Marin said it without drama, without the performance of guilt. Just a flat statement of fact delivered by someone who'd finished arguing with himself about it somewhere in the previous 3 hours. And because if I'd told someone sooner, Emma might not have spent 16 hours in a truck. Emma was awake. Lucas hadn't heard her wake, but she was sitting at the table with both hands around one of the cold coffee cups, looking at Marin with an expression that was difficult to read from the outside, and probably intentionally so. Keith, she said. Marin looked at her. I'm not going to tell you it's fine, she said, because it's not. But what happens now is more important than what happened then. So, Graves will move on the failed extraction how? What's his next step operationally? Marin thought about it. Not performing the consideration, actually thinking, working through what he knew about the man's patterns. He'll isolate the problem first. Make sure Garrett and Sims can't talk to anyone he doesn't control. Then he'll figure out his exposure level. If he thinks you have the documentation, he stopped. Does he know about the trapping camp? Not that we know of, Lucas said. Then he doesn't know what you have. He knows Emma's alive and she's with you and his extraction team failed. That's bad for him, but it's survivable if he can control the timeline. Marin looked at the table. He's going to request federal assistance on the missing persons case. Pull in outside resources he can manage. Make himself the coordinating officer. Which lets him be in the room when federal agents make contact with us, Emma said. Yes. Emma looked at Lucas. He was already nodding. Briggs needs to know that, she said. Lucas picked up the satellite phone and wrote the message in 2 sentences. Subject will attempt to insert himself as coordinating officer on the missing persons case. Ensure your team does not clear through Holt County channels. He sent it and set the phone down. Purcell had come fully awake during this exchange, sitting up from the floor where he'd been lying, and was watching the conversation with the focused attention of someone trying to catch up on briefing material he'd missed. He was young enough that the sleeplessness showed more on him than on the others. A gray cast to his face, eyes that were slightly too wide. What do we do for 36 hours? He asked. 29 now, Lucas said. Okay, 29. We just sit here? No, Lucas said. We make the cabin harder to take and the evidence harder to lose. He looked at Marin. Didn't you reach any clean contacts in the department? Not to report, not to request, just to know who's in the building and who's communicating with Graves in the next 12 hours? Marin thought about it. Dispatch. There's a day shift dispatcher, Karen Wolf, who's been there 20 years. She doesn't like Graves. Never has. She's not going to risk her pension on a phone call, but if I text her asking about shift scheduling, she'll respond. And how fast she responds and whether she uses our shorthand tells me something about the atmosphere in the building. That's enough? It's something. Marin paused. She's good at saying a lot with not much. Lucas looked at Emma. She looked back at him with the slight tilt of her head that he'd started to recognize as her version of your call. Do it, he said. While Marin pulled out his personal phone and composed the text, Lucas went to the kitchen and found what remained of the food situation. Not good, but functional. Crackers, a second tin of peanut butter, 3 cans of soup, dried pasta, half a bag of rice. He put the soup on, 2 cans at once, because everyone in the room had been running on too little for too long, and the cold was taking energy that no one could spare. He stood at the stove and thought about terrain. The problem with the cabin as a defensive position was not the building itself, but the tree line. At 50 meters on 3 sides, it was close enough that a disciplined force could move through it to within striking distance without being detected until they were nearly on top of the outer perimeter. His noise trap system bought time, 30 seconds, maybe 45, but not distance. And distance was what changed engagements. What he needed was a way to extend the reaction window without extending the perimeter. He could actually manage with the people and resources he had. He thought about the terrain features he'd mapped in 2 years of running these trails. The granite outcroppings on the west side, the creek draw to the southwest, the fire road a mile east, the dense second-growth pine to the north that channeled movement and slowed it to the point that a single observer with good positioning could track a 4-man element for several minutes before they reached the outer perimeter. He needed an observation post on the north approach, something elevated with a sight line that reached back to the fire road, and he needed it occupied. Purcell, he said without turning from the stove. Yeah. You good in the woods? Not training, actually. Have you operated in this terrain before? A pause. I grew up about 30 miles from here, hunting mostly, deer season. Can you read sign, tracks, compression, disturbance? Yeah, my grandfather was a tracker, old school. Lucas turned around. He looked at the young deputy with the gray face and the 2 wide eyes and reconsidered him slightly. There's a granite shelf about 400 meters north-northwest, Lucas said. Maybe 12 feet of elevation over the approach trail, with a clear sight line back to where the fire road meets the main trail. I need someone up there who can see movement and report it before it reaches the cabin perimeter. Purcell looked at him. You want me to be a lookout? An observation post? Yes. You'd have the satellite phone, I'll get you the frequency. And a two-way. I have one in the storage room. You report anything that moves on that road, any vehicle, any foot traffic, and you do it without being seen. And if someone comes up the approach toward me, you move. You don't engage. You report, and you move. Lucas held his eyes. The job is information, not contact. Can you do that? Purcell was quiet for 1 second. Yes. After you eat. The soup was ready and Lucas distributed it in the mismatched collection of mugs and bowls he had, because he didn't own 4 matching things of any kind, and nobody commented on that. They ate standing or sitting on whatever surface was available, and the cabin was quiet in the way that it got when people were thinking rather than resting. Marin's phone buzzed. He looked at it for a moment before he said anything. Karen responded in 4 minutes, he said. That's fast for her. She used the shorthand. He read the text again. She's saying, by reading between the lines, that the building is busy for 5 in the morning. Graves is in. 2 of his people are in. There's external communication happening. He's awake and working, Emma said. Yes. That's faster than I expected. He's scared, Lucas said. Emma looked at him. Graves doesn't scare. Every person scares. He's just better at not showing it than most. Lucas set down his mug. And scared men who are also controlled men are more dangerous than either one separately. They move faster. They compress timelines. They take risks they wouldn't take when they feel stable. Emma was quiet, processing that. He's going to do something today, she said. Not a question. He's going to do something in the next few hours, Lucas said. And it's not going to look like what he did last night. Last night was deniable. Off-the-books deputies, unofficial mission, civilian extraction. Today it'll be something official, something he can put his name on. The missing persons case, Marin said. He'll escalate it. Request state police assistance, cite potential foul play, position himself as the senior officer coordinating response. And when state police arrive in the area, he's with them, Emma said. He's the expert on local terrain and personnel. He's indispensable. She looked at the table. He walks into whatever location we're at with a badge and a state police escort, and there's nothing I can do. He controls the room. The fire cracked. Lucas went to the storage room and came back with the two-way radio, a handheld Motorola that he'd bought for backcountry communication and rarely used. He checked the battery, good, and handed it to Purcell along with a handwritten set of grid references for the observation post location. 400 meters north-northwest, he said. You'll see the granite shelf when you come up on it. Get above the approach trail, not above the road. You want the trail in your sight line, not the road itself. Call me when you're in position. Purcell pocketed the radio and the paper. He looked at Emma. Deputy Collins, he said. She looked at him. I'm sorry. For last night. Emma held his look for a moment. Something moved in her expression, brief and real. Go, she said. Keep your head down. He went. The cabin felt different with one fewer person in it, quieter in the specific way that the absence of the youngest voice in a room made everything else more weighted. Lucas watched the door close behind Purcell and made himself not think about whether sending a 26-year-old with 11 months on the force to an isolated observation post was tactically sound or something else. It was what he had. He worked with what he had. Marin was looking at him. You were special operations, Marin said. It wasn't a question exactly, but it wasn't fully a statement either. What makes you say that? Because I was Army infantry for 4 years before the badge, and I recognize someone who's running a mission. The way you broke down the terrain, the OP, the fact that you had a go bag pre-staged last night before any of us knew how bad it was going to get. He paused. Regular guys don't think that way, or they don't think it that fast. Lucas looked at him without answering for a moment. Navy, he said. SEAL? Does it matter right now? Marin looked at the wall. No, he said. I guess it doesn't. A pause. It explains the dog, though. Lucas looked at Ranger, who was lying near the door with his head on his paws and one eye still partially open. Ranger was a military working dog, Lucas said. Belgian Malinois crossed with German Shepherd. He was with a team in overseas. His handler was killed in action. I knew the handler. When Ranger came back stateside, I took him. He stopped. That's the whole story. Marin nodded. He didn't push. The two-way crackled at 0612. Purcell's voice, low and controlled, better than Lucas had expected from someone who'd been awake all night. In position. I've got the approach trail and about 200 meters of access track. Clear right now. One vehicle passed on the fire road about 10 minutes ago. Moving north. No stop. Copy, Lucas said. Stay low and stay warm. Check in every 30. Copy. Emma was at the table with the satellite phone, composing a longer update to Briggs. She'd been at it for 20 minutes, and when Lucas looked over her shoulder, she didn't cover the screen. He read what she had. It was precise and organized. A numbered list of evidence items with physical descriptions and photo documentation status, a summary of witness availability and willingness, an assessment of Graves' likely official moves in the next 12 hours, and a specific request that Briggs' team arrive in civilian vehicles, not federal plates, and make first contact by satellite communication rather than appearing at a location that might be under surveillance. You've done this before, he said. Written a briefing document? Coordinated with federal law enforcement while actively being hunted by your own department. She looked up at him. First time. She said it dryly, without humor exactly, but with the particular tone of someone who had found the only available angle that wasn't despair. It's good, he said. She sent it. The morning came in with more light than warmth, the sun getting above the ridge to the east but failing to do anything about the temperature, which had stalled in the low 20s. Lucas spent the first 2 hours of daylight hardening the cabin perimeter in ways that were possible with what he had. He moved the remaining noise traps from their overnight positions. Anyone surveilling the cabin would have noted the eastern line and redistributed them with different spacing on the south and west approaches. He cut paracord from the coil in the storage room and rigged trip lines at ankle height across the 3 most likely approach paths, each line connected to a different sound source in the brush, not injurious, not intended to be. The goal was information, not damage. He wanted to know someone was coming before they knew he knew. He found a box of 12-gauge shells in the storage room that he'd forgotten he owned, 6 shells, all solid slugs, and loaded them into the shotgun he also apparently owned and had also forgotten, a Mossberg 500 he'd bought at an estate sale 2 years ago and cleaned and shelved without any particular intention of using. He put the shotgun behind the kitchen counter where it was accessible without being visible from the windows. Marin watched all of this and said nothing, which Lucas appreciated. At 9:20, the satellite phone received a voice call. Lucas didn't recognize the protocol at first. He'd never received a voice call on the unit, and picked it up on the 3rd vibration cycle. This is Briggs. A male voice, mid-40s, measured cadence. The voice of someone who spent a lot of time on calls where the wrong word had consequences. Is Deputy Collins available? Lucas handed the phone to Emma. She took it and stood up and moved toward the window, not for privacy. There wasn't much of that available, but out of the reflex of someone who thought better on their feet. Lucas didn't listen to her side of it because he was listening to the approaches, but he caught the shape of the conversation in fragments. Emma confirming the evidence inventory, Emma confirming Marin's willingness to testify, Emma saying something he couldn't fully hear that made her jaw set in the way it did when she was maintaining a position against pushback. Then she said clearly, I understand the concern, but I'm telling you that if you run any coordination through Holt County channels, Graves will know your timeline before you're in the air. I'm asking you to trust that assessment. A pause. Because I've been right about everything else, she said. Another pause. Okay, she said. Okay, that works. She handed the phone back to Lucas and stood at the window with her arms crossed. What works? Lucas said. They're moving in 24 hours, not 36. He got sign-off on the compressed timeline. She paused. He also said there's chatter on the federal monitoring side. The trafficking network, the distribution side, not the production side, has been active in the last 48 hours. A lot of encrypted communication. Briggs thinks they know the production chain is compromised and they're trying to extract key assets before the operation gets shut down. Which means the people above Graves are moving. Yes, and Graves knows it, which is why he's... She stopped. The two-way radio crackled. Purcell's voice. And something in the frequency of it was different from the check-in 30 minutes ago. Tighter, higher, the involuntary register change of someone whose body had registered a threat before their mind finished processing it. Lucas, 2 vehicles on the fire road, moving slow. They've stopped at the access track junction. Lucas was at the radio instantly. How many occupants? I can't... Wait. 2 in the first vehicle. I can't see the second one clearly. The angle's wrong. First vehicle is a dark SUV. Official plates, I think. State plates. Marin was on his feet. Second vehicle, Purcell said. His voice dropped lower. It's a Holt County Sheriff's unit. The room was very still. Then you read the number on the department vehicle, Lucas said. A pause, longer than comfortable. C7, Purcell said. Command Vehicle 7. Marin said quietly, That's Graves' vehicle. Lucas looked at Emma. She was standing completely still with her arms still crossed, and her face doing the thing it did when she was processing fast, and had decided not to let any of it show on the outside. They're moving, Purcell said, coming down the access track. It looks like they're going toward the trapping camp, not toward the cabin. They took the left fork at the bottom of the track. Lucas exhaled. He doesn't know we've been to the camp, Emma said. He's checking on his operation, Lucas said, making sure it's intact before he makes his official move. He's going to find the disturbed evidence. Yes. How long does that buy us? Lucas thought about it. The access track from the fire road to the trapping camp was rough ground, 1.5 miles in. The camp itself would show signs of entry. They'd been careful but not sterile. There'd been footprints in the frost. The authorization forms were missing. The papers on the bench had been moved. Graves would know someone had been there. He'd need time to assess what was missing and what that meant. Maybe 2 hours, Lucas said. Maybe less if he moves fast. We need to move the evidence. The originals are here. He tapped his jacket. The satellite phone has the photographs. What we need to do is... The two-way again. Lucas. Purcell. Even quieter now. I've got foot movement on the approach trail, not the access track, the main trail, single individual, moving fast, coming from the east. Lucas picked up the rifle without thinking about it. The motion as automatic as breathing. Description. Male, civilian clothes, no visible weapon. He's not trying to be quiet. He's just moving fast. A pause. He looks lost, or scared. Lucas looked at Marin. Marin shook his head slightly. He didn't know. How far? Lucas said into the radio. 300 meters. Coming straight in on the trail. Lucas was at the front door. Stay in position, he said to Purcell. Watch the access track. Don't let Graves' vehicles move without calling it. Copy. He looked at Emma. Stay inside, Marin. I'll cover the back, Marin said. Lucas went out. He moved off the porch and into the tree line immediately, not staying on the approach trail, but paralleling it from inside the cover of the pines, moving north to intercept. Ranger came with him. The frost was gone from the ground now, and the dead leaves were wet and soft and nearly silent underfoot, which was the one favor the morning was offering. He came to a position behind a windfall, a downed pine, long dead, the bark mostly gone, the wood gray and solid, with a clear angle on 50 meters of the approach trail and settled in behind it. He heard the runner before he saw him. Irregular footsteps, fast but not trained fast. Someone moving with urgency and without the discipline to keep their breathing controlled so that he could hear the labored inhale-exhale from 30 meters. The figure came around the slight bend in the trail and Lucas had him in sight. Mid-40s, heavy-set, civilian jacket and work pants. No hat. Face red from cold and exertion. No visible weapon. Hands open and swinging, not reaching. He looked at the face. He'd seen the face before. It took him 3 seconds to place it, and then it landed. The Park Service bulletin board in the ranger station in the valley. A photograph from a departmental event 3 years ago. A fundraiser of some kind. Faces labeled. Chief Administrative Officer, Holt County Sheriff's Department. A man named Gerald Foss. The man who shared access to the departmental stamp. Lucas came out from behind the windfall. Foss pulled up short and made a sound that was almost a shout, and then cut it off, both hands going up in an instinctive gesture that was equal parts surrender and shock. I'm not... He was breathing so hard the words came out in pieces. I'm not armed. I'm looking for... There's a man out here, an ex-military man, and a deputy. That's me, Lucas said. Both partly. Stop talking and breathe. Foss stared at him. At the rifle. At Ranger, who was sitting 3 feet away with the calm focus that he deployed specifically to communicate that he was not currently attacking, but could redirect very quickly. You're Mercer, Foss said. Who are you and how did you find this location? I'm Gerald Foss. I'm the CAO for Holt County. I found the location because Victor Graves filed an ops order this morning with your property coordinates attached, and I'm the one who processes ops orders. Lucas looked at him for a long moment. Come inside, what? He said. And understand that how this next conversation goes depends entirely on what you say in it. Foss nodded. He lowered his hands and followed, and he had the look of a man who had just run a mile and a half through cold woods because the alternative was worse, and who was not entirely sure the alternative wasn't worse anyway. They came through the front door and Emma looked up from the table, and the moment she saw Foss, her expression went through three things in fast succession: recognition, calculation, and something harder to name. Gerald, she said. Emma. He was still catching his breath. You're alive. Disappointed? The question landed hard. He flinched. No, he said. God, no. That's why I'm here. He stood in the center of the cabin with Marin behind him and Lucas beside him and Emma across the table from him, and he was the most frightened person in the room by a significant margin, and he knew it. The ops order, Emma said. What does it say? Foss pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket. His hand was shaking. Not performance, genuine adrenaline tremor. He put it on the table. Emma unfolded it and read. Lucas read over her shoulder. It was formatted as a legitimate law enforcement operational order. Coordinating officer, Captain Victor Graves. Supporting agency, State Police, Eastern Division. Objective, locate and secure Deputy Emma Collins. Missing, potentially in mental health crisis. Supporting objective, take into custody one Lucas Mercer, civilian, suspected of obstruction and unlawful detention of a law enforcement officer. Lucas read the last part twice. Unlawful detention. He's inverting it, Emma said. Her voice was flat. Completely, Lucas said. In this document, I'm the victim and you're the perpetrator. Yes. And the state police are going to arrive with that framing active. If Briggs doesn't get here first, Emma looked at Foss. When does this execute? Foss was still standing with his hands slightly out from his sides, the posture of a man who wanted everyone in the room to be able to see both his palms at all times. Graves filed it at 6:30. State Police acknowledged at 7:40. Estimated on-site time was listed as early afternoon. That's 4 hours, Marin said. Less, Foss said. I left the building at 8:15. It's been 40 minutes since then. Lucas did the arithmetic. 3 hours, maybe slightly more. Briggs is 24 hours out, Emma said, looking at Lucas. I know. We can't hold a legitimate state police operation at rifle point for 24 hours. I know. So what do we do? Lucas looked at the ops order on the table, then at Foss. Why are you here? He said. Not the stated reason. He meant the real one, the thing that had put Gerald Foss in running shoes on a wilderness trail at 8 in the morning. Foss looked at the table. When he looked up, his face had the particular expression of someone who is about to say something they've been not saying for a long time. Because I signed 2 of those transport manifests, he said. The cabin was very quiet. Graves told me they were standard research authorization forms. I'm administrative, I'm not law enforcement, I don't know what a wildlife trafficking manifest looks like versus a legitimate research form. I signed them because he put them in front of me and told me they were routine. He stopped. I found out 2 months ago what they actually were, when I started looking more carefully at what I'd been signing. And you didn't report it, Emma said. No. A beat. I was afraid. Of Graves? Of what I'd be admitting to. He met her eyes. I know that doesn't make me sympathetic. I know what that looks like. Emma held his gaze for a long time. Lucas watched her hold it without intervening. It looks like what it is, she said. It also looks like someone who's here now instead of not. She looked at Lucas. If Foss gives a sworn statement about the forms he signed and the circumstances and what he discovered afterward, that's corroboration of the forged authorization chain. It's Graves using his CAO to launder the paperwork. It adds to the case, Lucas said. It adds significantly. She looked back at Foss. But it doesn't solve the 3-hour problem. Lucas picked up the satellite phone. He called Briggs directly, the way Briggs had called them 2 hours ago. The agent picked up on the second vibration. We have a situation, Lucas said. Graves has filed a state-coordinated ops order for this location with an inversion narrative. He's the rescuing officer. I'm the obstruction suspect. State Police ETA is approximately 3 hours. Your timeline is 24. He paused. That gap is the problem. Silence on the line. The specific silence of someone running numbers. What's your evidence status? Briggs said. Physical documentation with authentication. 2 law enforcement witnesses with direct testimony on command orders. A third individual with corroboration on the forged authorization chain. The third individual is voluntary? Lucas looked at Foss. Are you voluntary? Foss was sweating slightly despite the cold of the cabin. He looked at Emma, not Lucas, when he answered. Yes. Voluntary, Lucas said. Another silence, longer this time. I can get a federal hold on the ops order, Briggs said. If I file an active federal investigation flag against the named subject, Graves, it creates a jurisdictional conflict that freezes the state operation pending resolution. It doesn't stop them from coming, but it stops them from executing the order when they arrive. How long does that take to file? 20 minutes. And it holds? For 72 hours. Long enough. Lucas exhaled once. Do it. I need Deputy Collins on record right now. Voice statement identified consenting to federal jurisdiction. 30 seconds. Lucas handed the phone to Emma. She took it, and her voice when she spoke was the steadiest it had been since he'd found her in the truck. Clear and precise and completely without hesitation, like someone who had finally found the ground under their feet after a very long time of not knowing where it was. She gave her name, rank, and department. She stated that she was acting voluntarily. She stated that she had physical evidence of criminal conspiracy by a named senior law enforcement officer and was consenting to federal jurisdiction over her case and her person. 32 seconds total. She handed the phone back. Briggs confirmed receipt and disconnected. The cabin was quiet for a moment. Then Marin said, "That was either very smart or it just made everything more complicated." "Both," Emma said. "Yeah." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Usually is." Lucas set the phone on the table and looked at the room. Marin against the wall with his arms crossed. Foss sitting at the table with his hands flat on the wood, looking like a man who'd made his decision and was waiting to find out what it cost. Emma standing near the window with the light on her face and the bruising still dark around the butterfly strips, and her posture carrying the particular weight of someone who'd been running on discipline alone for longer than was reasonable. Ranger was at the door. The dog's ears came forward. Then his body went into the low-focused posture that meant he'd picked up something on the air that hadn't reached human perception yet. Lucas was at the window before anyone spoke. The access track, visible at an angle through the trees. Movement on it. A vehicle, moving fast now, not slow. The deliberate pace was gone. The dark SUV from Purcell's description, coming back toward the Fire Road junction, and behind it the Holt County Command Unit. The two-way crackled. "Lucas," Purcell's voice. "They're coming back from the camp, fast, and they're not going to the Fire Road." Lucas watched the vehicle angle at the junction. "They're coming your direction," Purcell said. "Directly." "Copy." He set the radio on the table and looked at the room and felt something shift in him that he recognized but didn't name. The thing that happened when the situation reached the point of no return and the variables collapsed to a single manageable clarity. Not calm exactly, not the absence of stress. The presence of something that ran deeper than both. "All right," he said, "here's what we're going to do." "Marin," Lucas said, "you're taking Foss out the back door. North through the tree line, then west to the creek draw. Stay in the dead ground and don't move until I call you on the two-way." Marin looked at him. "And leave you two here." "Here." "Yes." It's not a debate." Lucas held his eyes. "You and Foss are the testimony. Without you in a courtroom, this is our word against a captain's. You're too valuable to be in this building when Graves walks through the door." Marin processed that for exactly 2 seconds. Then he looked at Foss. "Can you move?" Foss stood up from the table. He still looked like a man who'd run farther than he was built for, but something had settled in him since he'd said what he'd said. The way people sometimes steadied after a confession, regardless of what came after it. "Yes." "Back door," Lucas said. "Now. Don't use the radio unless something changes on your end." They went. The back door opened and closed, and the cabin was quieter by two people and felt it. Emma was at the south window, watching the access track through the gap in the blanket he'd hung over the broken east window frame. From the south window, she had an oblique angle on the approach from the junction, and she'd positioned herself correctly, back from the glass, not silhouetted. "One vehicle turning onto the cabin track," she said. "The SUV. Command unit is holding at the junction." "Graves is staying back," Lucas said. "Sending the state police in first." "Yes, which means he's still managing exposure. He doesn't want to be the first one through the door." "That's something." Lucas looked at the room, the shotgun behind the kitchen counter, the rifle in his hands, two Glocks on the table. He thought about what this looked like from the outside. A civilian with weapons in a cabin, a missing deputy inside, a state police vehicle approaching on official orders. He thought about how fast situations like this became irreversible when the wrong person made the wrong decision in the first 30 seconds of contact. He put the rifle down on the kitchen counter, face down, and stepped back from it. Emma turned from the window. "What are you doing?" "Making sure nobody dies over a misunderstanding." He looked at her. "When they come in, you talk first. You identify yourself, you state your status, you tell them there's a federal hold on the ops order, clear and immediate. Don't give anyone a reason to escalate." "And you?" "I'm a cooperative civilian." He spread his hands slightly. "I put my weapons down. They can see I'm not a threat." The conversation happens. Emma looked at him for a long moment. "You're trusting that Briggs' hold went through." "I'm trusting that you gave a good statement and Briggs is competent." He paused. "And I'm trusting that state police officers following a state ops order don't want a federal jurisdiction conflict any more than we want a firefight." She looked at the rifle on the counter. "That's a lot of trust for a man who hasn't trusted anyone in 2 years." 2.5, he said, "and I'm not saying it's comfortable." The vehicle sound was close now, the low grinding of tires on the frost-hardened track, and then it stopped. Doors. 2 sets of footsteps, unhurried, the gait of people who had backup and knew it. A knock on the front door, firm, official. "State Police, we're responding to a welfare check. Deputy Emma Collins, please respond if you're inside." Emma looked at Lucas one more time. He nodded. She crossed to the door and opened it. 2 state troopers. Late 30s, early 40s, both in full uniform, neither with weapons drawn. That was the first good sign. The one who'd knocked, a woman, Sergeant Stripes, short gray-brown hair, looked at Emma's face and the bruising around the butterfly strips and the week-old quality of her uniform, and her expression shifted in the way of someone whose briefing material had just been revised by reality. "Deputy Collins," she said. "Sergeant." Emma kept her voice even. "Before anything else, I need to inform you that there is an active federal investigation hold on the ops order that brought you here, filed approximately 40 minutes ago by Special Agent Noah Briggs, FBI Denver Field Office, against Captain Victor Graves of Holt County Sheriff's Department." She paused. "The subject named in that hold is the coordinating officer on your ops order." The sergeant's eyes moved to Lucas briefly, then back to Emma. "Can you verify that hold?" "Agent Briggs can verify it directly. I have his contact on a satellite line." The 2 troopers exchanged a look. Not skepticism, exactly. More the particular recalibration of people who'd arrived expecting one situation and were being handed a significantly more complicated one. "All right," the sergeant said. "Let's start from the beginning." It took 40 minutes. Lucas sat at the kitchen table and said very little and let Emma talk, which was the correct allocation of credibility in the room. The sergeant, her name was Varela, listened with the focused attention of someone who understood that whatever she did in the next hour was going to be significant and was determined not to make it wrong. Her partner stood near the door and said almost nothing and kept his hands visible and relaxed, which Lucas respected. Briggs confirmed the federal hold by phone. Varela called her own superior from the car, came back inside looking like someone who'd just had a moderately unpleasant conversation, and said that the state operation was suspended pending federal review. "What about Graves?" Emma said. "He's at the junction." "He's aware the operation is suspended," Varela said. "He's—" A brief pause, the pause of someone choosing words. "He's not happy about it." "He's not going to run," Lucas said. It was the first substantial thing he'd said in 40 minutes, and both troopers looked at him. "He's too invested in the official narrative. If he runs now, he's guilty. He's going to stay and fight it through channels for as long as he can." "Who are you exactly?" Varela's partner said. Lucas Mercer. I live here. I found Deputy Collins in the woods 48 hours ago, and I made a decision to keep her safe until federal law enforcement could arrive. He met the man's eyes. That's the complete summary. The partner looked at him for a moment. The ops order described you as, I know what it described me as. He said it without heat. You can read the description and look at the room and decide for yourself how accurate it is. Another look between the two troopers. Varela almost smiled. Almost. Lucas called to Marin on the two-way and told him to bring Foss back in. They came through the back door 10 minutes later, Foss red-faced and stiff-jointed from the cold and the crouching in the creek draw, Marin moving with the careful deliberateness of a man who was aware he was about to have a significant conversation about his career and his choices, and was holding himself together around it. The cabin was crowded now in a way it had never been. 7 people and a dog in a space built for one, and the air was close and warm from the fire, and everyone was tired in the bone-deep way of too many hours of sustained pressure. Purcell came in from the north at Varela's request, escorted to the cabin by her partner. When he walked through the door, he looked at Marin, and the look that passed between them was long and quiet, and said several things that neither of them was going to say out loud. Then Purcell sat down on the floor near the fireplace because there was nowhere else to sit, and Ranger went over to him, which surprised everyone except Lucas. At 11:40 in the morning, a second vehicle appeared on the approach track. Not law enforcement, a dark green pickup, civilian plates, moving with the specific, unhurried confidence of someone who'd been given precise coordinates and was arriving exactly where they intended. 2 men got out. The driver was compact, dark-haired, moved with an economy that Lucas recognized from long familiarity. The passenger was taller, younger, carrying a hard case that had the profile of recording and documentation equipment. Briggs had moved his timeline. He came through the door without knocking. Emma had gone out to meet him and brought him in. And the first thing he did was look at Lucas, and the look was brief and assessing and landed with the precision of someone who read people for a living. "Mr. Mercer," he said. "Agent Briggs. You've been busy." It was indicated. Briggs almost smiled at that, the ghost of it, and turned to the room. He was good at reading a room. Lucas watched him do it, the fast inventory of faces and postures and what each person's body was saying about their status and allegiance. And he made it look like he wasn't doing it. "All right," Briggs said. "Here's where we are." He laid it out cleanly. The federal hold was active and ironclad for 72 hours. His authorization to act on the trafficking case extended across the 3 states where the distribution network had been documented, which gave him jurisdiction that ran right over Holt County like it wasn't there. He had a team in the valley, 4 agents, currently holding position at the ranger station, and he had transport for witnesses and evidence. He looked at the authorization forms that Lucas spread on the table in front of him, and he looked at them carefully, and when he looked up, his face was composed, but his eyes said something more than composed. "These are originals?" he said. "Yes," Emma said. "I didn't touch them directly. Lucas handled the extraction." Briggs looked at Lucas. "Chain of custody." "I can document every step from the moment we found them," Lucas said. "Location, time, conditions, no alteration." "And the photographic documentation?" Emma handed him the satellite phone with the photographs. Briggs scrolled through them with a thumb, and his expression settled into something steady and conclusive. "Victor Graves is going to be arrested today," he said. It wasn't a question, and it wasn't a boast. Just a statement of what was now the mechanical outcome of the evidence on the table. The question is whether we do it here, which is messy, or whether we bring him in through the Valley Junction, which is cleaner and gives us better control of the scene. "He's still at the junction," Varela said. "I know." Briggs looked at Emma. "I want you in the vehicle when we approach him. Not as a prop. You don't have to say anything, but I want him to see you before he sees the arrest team. I want him to understand what happened before the cuffs go on." Emma looked at him for a moment. "Why?" "Because men like Graves, when they're surprised, they become unpredictable. When they understand, they become manageable." He paused. "And I want this to be manageable." Emma was quiet. Lucas watched her think about it. "Okay," she said. She looked at Lucas. He could see she was about to say something and was working out how to say it, which was unusual enough that he waited. "Come with us," she said. "Briggs doesn't need me." "I know." A pause. "I'm not asking for Briggs." Lucas looked at her face. The bruising was deep yellow-purple now at its edges, fading toward the center. The butterfly strips were holding. Her eyes were steady and tired, and something in them was the same thing that had been in them since the truck. Not quite trust, because trust was too simple a word for what developed between two people over 48 hours of sustained crisis. But something in the same family. Something that had been built from the specific materials available and was durable because of what it had been built through. "All right," he said. He looked at Ranger. "Stay," he said. The dog looked at him with the particular expression of an animal who understood the instruction and had opinions about it. Then he went to the fireplace and lay down. Purcell laughed, a short, surprise sound, the first genuine laugh in the cabin since any of this started. They drove in two vehicles, Briggs's pickup and Varella's state unit, down the access track to the Fire Road junction. The drive took 8 minutes. Nobody talked much. The forest came apart on either side, the dense second growth giving way to the more open stand near the junction. And when the junction appeared, Lucas could see Graves' command vehicle parked on the shoulder of the Fire Road with the engine running, white exhaust in the cold air. Graves was standing outside the vehicle. He'd seen them coming. He'd had time to prepare his face. Lucas had expected something from that face. Some flicker of the calculation that had built the operation and maintained it for years, or some early concession to the mechanics of what was about to happen. What he saw instead was something he recognized from encounters with other men in other places. The specific dignity of someone who had decided to make this as hard as possible regardless of how it ended. Graves was in full uniform, posture squared, hands at his sides. He looked like a man awaiting inspection. Briggs pulled up first. He and his partner got out. Then Varella's vehicle stopped and the door opened and Emma got out. The moment Graves saw her, the dignity cracked. Just for a second, less than a second, a fraction of it, something moved across his face that was neither calculation nor preparation. Something older and more reflexive. Lucas watched it from the passenger seat of Briggs's vehicle before he stepped out. And he couldn't name it exactly, but it looked like the thing that happened when a person realized that what they'd done had consequences that had now fully arrived. Then Graves put it away, and the face went smooth again. "Emma," he said. His voice was the voice of a man doing a performance of concern, and it was a technically good performance, but it was performed to the wrong audience. Emma stopped 6 feet from him. She didn't speak. "I was worried," he said. "When you went missing." "Victor." She said his name flatly, without rank, without the inflection of someone who had ever trained under him or respected him, just his name, precise and final. "Stop." He stopped. Briggs stepped forward and identified himself and stated the federal authority under which he was acting, and the words were standard and procedural, and Lucas had heard their equivalent many times in different forms. And what mattered wasn't the words but the moment between them. The moment when Victor Graves heard them and understood that the machinery he'd spent 22 years building and 7 years corrupting had just been turned around and aimed at him with a precision and a momentum that nothing he had left could redirect. He didn't resist. Lucas had wondered, in the back of his mind, whether there would be resistance. Graves was the type who might calculate that a dramatic final move was preferable to a quiet end. But when Briggs' partner came around with the restraints, Graves stood still and let it happen. His eyes were on Emma the entire time, not pleading, not angry, something more specific and harder to categorize. "You should have left it alone," he said. Emma met his eyes. "You should have been what you told me you were." A pause. "Yes," Graves said, quiet and flat. "I should have." Then they put him in the vehicle and the door closed. And that was the last time Emma Collins ever spoke to Victor Graves. And the valley was very quiet except for the sound of the wind through the pines and the distant noise of water in the creek draw. Lucas stood on the shoulder of the Fire Road and looked at the tree line and thought about nothing in particular for a moment, not tactically, not operationally, just the trees. The way the light came through them at this hour, the low winter sun hitting the upper canopy at a shallow angle and turning the dead needles amber. The cold, the sound of his own breathing. Emma came to stand beside him. She didn't say anything immediately, and he didn't prompt her. "Thank you," she said finally. "You would have gotten out of the truck," he said. "Eventually." "Maybe." She looked at the trees. "But not before." She stopped. "It would have gone differently." Probably. You didn't have to make it your problem. Lucas thought about that. The specific moment when he'd seen Ranger freeze on the trail and left the path to find out why. The fraction of a second between seeing the truck and deciding to open the window. The point at which he'd crossed from a man living in the woods, avoiding everything, to something else. Something he hadn't been in 3 years and hadn't particularly missed, and was now standing in without having decided to. No, he said. I didn't. She looked at him. But you did. I did? She was quiet for a moment. What happens now, for you? He thought about the cabin, the corrugated roof, the sagging north side of the porch, the trails he'd mapped, and the 2.5 years of mornings that had started to feel like enough, and had been. Until they weren't. I don't know, he said honestly. You could leave, she said. After all this? Most people would. Most people weren't here. She almost smiled. Not quite, but close enough. Briggs came over. He had the practiced courtesy of a man who understood he was interrupting something, and did it anyway because his schedule required it. I need both of you in the valley for statements, he said. Today, if possible. Today is fine, Lucas said. And the witnesses, Marin, Purcell, Foss, they'll need to come in over the next 48 hours. Separately, formal statements, recorded. I'll coordinate that, Emma said. Briggs looked at Lucas. Mr. Mercer, your documentation of the evidence chain at the camp site. I'm going to need that in writing, as detailed as you can make it. Time, location, conditions, what was touched and what wasn't. I can have it to you by this evening. Briggs nodded. He looked like he wanted to say something else, something that wasn't procedural, and he almost didn't. You made this a significantly cleaner case than it had any right to be, he said finally, given the circumstances. Lucas didn't respond to that. He turned and walked back to the vehicle. The drive down to the valley took 25 minutes, and Lucas watched the forest go by through the window without speaking. The tree line thinned as they descended, the dense second growth giving way to the bigger, older timber that grew in the lower elevations, and then to the cleared land near the valley floors. The ranger station, a gas station, a hardware store, the small grid of streets that constituted the edge of the nearest town. He hadn't been down here in 6 weeks. It felt longer than 6 weeks. Briggs's team had set up in the ranger station's conference room, which seated 8 uncomfortably. Lucas gave his statement to one of the junior agents, a woman who took notes with the focused efficiency of someone who'd done this a lot and had learned that the fastest way through it was to be precisely clear about what she needed. Lucas answered everything directly. The agent asked twice about his background, not as an accusation, as a material question, because his capacity to make the tactical assessments he'd described depended on his training and experience. And he answered both times without elaboration, but without evasion. Special Operations Command, he said. Naval Special Warfare. I left the service 3 years ago. Voluntarily? Yes. She looked at him over her notepad. And you came to Blackridge because it was the opposite of everywhere I'd been, he said. She wrote that down without commenting on it. He was done in an hour. Emma's statement took longer. He didn't wait for her. Briggs had things that needed his attention, and the conference room was occupied. So he sat outside on the ranger station steps with his jacket zipped and his hands in his pockets and watched the valley. The mountains to the west were already in shadow, the late afternoon arriving early the way it did in November at elevation. Ranger was at the cabin. He'd left the dog in a building with no windows on the east side, which bothered him more than it probably should have. He needed to get back. Marin came out of the building at some point and sat down 2 steps below him. He'd given his statement first, in and out, in 40 minutes. What are they going to do with me? Marin said. That depends on what you do next, Lucas said. They said the same thing. Then it's probably true. Marin looked at the parking lot. I knew something was wrong for months. That's the part I can't... He stopped. I kept finding reasons to let it sit. I know. I'm not looking for absolution. Good, Lucas said. Because I'm not giving any. A silence. Not hostile. You going to stay? Marin said. In Blackridge. Lucas looked at the tree line on the western ridge. Probably, he said. Marin nodded. He stood up and went back inside. Purcell came out sometime later and stood at the bottom of the steps without sitting down. He looked like he'd slept for 2 hours in the last 2 days, which was approximately accurate. You know what the worst part is? Purcell said. Lucas waited. I believed him. When Graves told us Emma had gone rogue, I actually believed him. He shook his head. I've been a deputy for 11 months, and I let a man I'd met 4 times tell me another officer was a criminal, and I took the gun and drove into the woods. You were given false information by a superior officer, Lucas said. I know that. He kicked at a pebble on the step. I still believed him. Yes, Lucas said, that's how it works. The people who deceive us are usually the people who know how we think. Purcell looked at him. Does it get easier, knowing who to trust? Lucas thought about it honestly, instead of reaching for something easy. You get better at paying attention, he said. You don't always get better at knowing. You just learn to notice the difference between someone who's telling you the truth and someone who's telling you what truth sounds like. Purcell was quiet for a moment. What's the difference? The first one usually costs them something, Lucas said. The second one usually doesn't. Purcell thought about that. Then he nodded slowly and went back inside. The sky was turning the deep bruised purple of a winter sunset when Emma finally came out. She sat beside him on the top step without comment, pulling her jacket tighter. Someone inside had given her a clean department jacket, not Holt County, a generic law enforcement issue, and her hair was loose from where it had been pulled back for 2 days. Graves gave a partial statement, she said. How partial? Enough to implicate Adrian Cross by name. His lawyer told him it was his best position. She paused. Cross is the distribution side. Briggs thinks he's been running the synthetic compound network through 6 distribution states. Graves was the production protection, keeping the forest operation safe in exchange for a fee. She looked at her hands. 7 years. Graves had been taking money for 7 years. Lucas thought about that. 7 years of decisions. 7 years of looking at the people he worked with and deciding each time that the money was worth what he was doing to them. And Cross? Lucas said. They're moving on him tonight. Briggs has had eyes on his operation in Denver for 6 weeks, apparently. He was already building the case from the distribution end. She paused. Finding what we had, gave him the production link he needed. It closes the chain. So it's done, Lucas said. The arrests are done, she said. The case is going to take 18 months in court. But for now, she exhaled slowly. The breath clouded and dissolved. For now, it's done. They sat in the quiet for a while. The ranger station lights came on behind them. A car went by on the main road below, headlights sweeping across the asphalt in the early dark. They want to give me a commendation, Emma said. The flatness in her voice was specific. You don't want it? I want Graves to have been who I thought he was. She said it without self-pity, just precision. A commendation doesn't fix the other thing. No, Lucas said, it doesn't. She turned to look at him directly. What about you? Briggs mentioned that the department would want to formally acknowledge no. She held his look. Just no? I live in the woods. I found someone who needed help, and I didn't walk away. That doesn't need a certificate. He looked at the darkening tree line. And I'd rather nobody with a camera knew my name. She was quiet. Then, old habit? Permanent habit. She almost said something else and stopped. Then she said it anyway. The knee. The one you press your hand against when you think nobody's watching. He looked at her. I notice things, she said. Professional requirement. Operational injury, he said. Old one. Does it affect you in the field? No. Does it hurt? He considered the question, the actual question, not as a tactical concern. Constantly, he said. At a level I stopped counting as pain. She nodded. Not with sympathy exactly, with the acknowledgement of someone who understood the distinction between pain that stopped you and pain that simply became part of the background frequency of moving through the world. The drive back to the cabin took 30 minutes. Briggs sent one of his agents with them, not as escort, but to collect the shotgun and the remaining weapons for documentation. And the agent was quiet in the back seat and didn't make anything complicated, which Lucas appreciated. Ranger met them at the door. The dog assessed Emma for a long moment when she came through, the careful olfactory inventory that he ran on everyone, updating his file on her from the last time, and then went back to his position near the fireplace, apparently satisfied that the status quo was confirmed. Emma looked at the dog, and something in her face went softer than he'd seen it go since the truck. "He's extraordinary," she said. "He has opinions," Lucas said. "But yes." The agent collected what he needed and left. The cabin was quiet for the first time in 2 days. Genuinely quiet. Not the tense tactical quiet of people listening for approaches, but the natural silence of a building at rest. Lucas put water on because the habit was automatic, and they both needed something to do with their hands. Emma sat at the table and looked at the authorization forms that Briggs had left with him pending formal evidence logging in the morning. The forms with Graves' signature. She looked at them for a while and then she turned them face down, and it wasn't dramatic, just the quiet finality of someone deciding to stop looking at something they'd already seen enough of. "What did you do?" she said. "Before you came here, specifically." He looked at her from the kitchen area. "A lot of different things," he said, "in a lot of different places. The specifics aren't things I talk about." "Not cleared?" "Not mine to share," he said, which was a different thing, and she understood the distinction because she didn't push. "Were you good at it?" He thought about that question honestly, the way he'd thought about the question about the knee. "Yes," he said. "I was good at it, and I was bad at coming home from it." He paused. "Those two things aren't unrelated." She was quiet. "The man who owned Ranger before me," Lucas said. "His name was Dario Vega, best operator I served with. He understood people the way you understand terrain, by moving through it carefully and paying attention." He watched the water begin to steam at the edges of the pot. He was killed on an extraction that should have been clean. The op was compromised from inside the command chain. He stopped. "It took me a year to accept that I couldn't have prevented it. Another year to accept that I needed to stop trying to live in the space where I might have." Emma said nothing. She was looking at him with the direct, steady attention that she gave everything that mattered. "Blackridge was where I stopped moving," he said. "Not where I stopped. Just stopped moving." "And now?" He poured the water and brought the cups and sat down across from her. "Now I found out that stopping isn't the same as being done," he said. "I'm still working out what that means." She wrapped both hands around the cup. Outside, the wind moved through the pines with the low, continuous sound that had been the background of his mornings for 2.5 years. The fire had been restoked and was burning properly now, the orange warmth spreading across the stone floor. "I'm going to recommend that Purcell be retained," she said after a while. "What he did was wrong, but he came back from it before it was forced. That counts." She paused. "Marin's more complicated." "He has more to answer for," Lucas said. "Yes, but he answered it." She looked at the cup. "I don't know what that's worth yet. I'll figure it out." "That sounds like you're planning to stay in the department." She looked up at him. "Did you think I wasn't?" "I didn't know. They need people who know what happened," she said. "If everyone who knows walks away, it just gets rebuilt by people who don't." She said it simply, without grandiosity, the statement of someone who had thought it through and arrived at a conclusion they weren't thrilled about, but accepted. "So yes, I'm staying." He nodded. "What about you?" she said. "Blackridge." He looked at the fireplace, where Ranger had finally put his chin on his paws and closed both eyes for the first time in 2 days. "Blackridge," he said. He thought about the trails, the corrugated roof, the south windows he still hadn't replaced, the way the light came through the upper canopy in early morning before the world fully woke up, in that thin silver window between dark and dawn, when everything was still and the forest felt like it was his alone. He thought about what it had felt like to run the trail and find the truck, the decision to open the window, the 48 hours since. He thought about Dario Vega and the extraction that went wrong and the year of not sleeping and the second year of running trails in the dark at 5:30 in the morning and calling it recovery when what it really was hiding. "I'm going to fix the north porch," he said. Emma looked at him. "The support post has been sinking since October. I keep putting it off." He drank his coffee. "Still bad. And the east window needs a proper frame to replace the ones that got knocked in." She was quiet for a moment, reading what he was actually saying. "That sounds like you're staying," she said. "It sounds like I'm staying," he agreed. She nodded, and didn't say anything else about it. They finished the coffee and the fire burned down to something steady and sustainable, and the forest outside went fully dark, the stars coming through in the gaps between the pines, the temperature dropping another few degrees below what the thermometer on the north wall registered. At some point, Emma fell asleep at the table again, not dramatically, just there and then not, head on her folded arms, breathing slow and even. Lucas covered her with the blanket the way he'd done the first night and went to the window and looked at the tree line. Ranger came and stood beside him. The dog's shoulder was at his hip. Lucas put a hand on the back of the animal's neck and felt the warmth there, the specific warmth of something living and present and reliable. The forest was quiet, the way it had been quiet before any of this, the way it would be quiet again tomorrow morning at 5:30 when he ran the trail in the cold and the light came thin and silver through the trees, and everything that had happened here would still have happened, but would have moved from emergency into history, into the kind of thing that changed a place without destroying it. He stood there for a while. Then he went and sat in the chair by the fireplace and watched the coals and let the night pass. In the months that followed, the case against Victor Graves and Adrian Cross moved through the federal court system with the methodical weight of well-documented evidence. Graves received 19 years. Cross, whose distribution network had reached 8 states and whose synthetic compound had been linked to overdose deaths in 4 of them, received 32. Gerald Foss negotiated a cooperation agreement and lost his position and his pension, which was less than some thought he deserved and more than others. Keith Marin resigned from the department, testified fully, and was not charged. Danny Purcell stayed on. Emma Collins returned to active duty 6 weeks after the arrests. She was promoted to lieutenant 8 months later. She came back to the cabin once that winter, unannounced, on a morning when the frost was hard on the ground and the smoke from the chimney was the only sign of occupation from the trail. She knocked. Lucas opened the door. They had coffee, which was still bad, and talked about nothing consequential for an hour. Ranger spent the whole visit with his head on her knee. She left before noon, and the forest went quiet again. Lucas fixed the north porch that January, replaced the east window frame in February, and ran the trails every morning at 5:30 without exception. He didn't stop listening to the woods, and he didn't stop watching the trails, and he didn't go back to being the man who'd lived there before Emma Collins had landed in his life, because that man was finished, and what replaced him was something quieter and more settled and less afraid of what the silence might say if he stopped moving long enough to let it speak. Ranger got older. They both did. The forest stayed. Some things don't need to be escaped. They need to be chosen, again, after you've seen what they cost. And that second choice is the one that finally holds.